Chapter 66. Broom Eyebrows was also unlucky enough to become the assassination target of a barb demon assassin, but the latter was even more unlucky than him. Dalton was a shadow thief master who hid very well. What was a shadow thief? Shadows were like clothes, and dark blades were companions. What was a shadow thief master? Shadows submitted to willpower, and dark blades submitted to majesty. Unlike assassins, shadow thieves rarely sacrificed themselves to make a move. They were better at sneaking and ambushing, and they were better at instinctive dodging. Before the barb demon's thorns could pierce Dalton's body, its body, which was still in stealth, was hit by the spiked gloves. The demon was directly knocked out of stealth and fell in front of the other defenders without slowing down. Naturally, it ended up with axes and was chopped to death. At the same time, the military police team formed by the Batsa Devil also noticed the demon's aura. Under the leadership of the Bone Demon elites, groups of barb demons launched an attack on the instigator of all this, the wolf snake demon that suddenly appeared. The demon's attack could not be said to be slow and fierce. This was the way to deal with a powerful demon like the wolf snake demon. The three ogre brothers, who were left behind by Keys to supervise the battle, also went into battle to meet this Tana, who dared to rashly enter Bador Fortress. However, the wolf snake demon, who was about to be stabbed by sharp blades, suddenly changed its appearance in the face of the attacks that emerged from all directions. Beheading sword, double-headed sword, flail, one-handed axe, war hammer, shield, 6 arms, 6 different weapons. The original wolf snake demon's body flowed like water waves, and between the light and shadow, a 6-armed snake demon replaced the former and appeared in front of everyone. Sword barrier. The 6-armed snake demon used its special skill, and the enchanted weapons formed a wall made of cold iron and sharp blades. For a time, it tore apart the attacks of Bador Fortress's defenders, and it even used its huge body and extraordinary strength to launch a wave of counterattacks. Dozens of barb demon guards that had been caught in the 6-armed Naga demon sword barrier did not even last half a breath's time before being chopped into pieces by this demon's weapon. An elite bone demon that tried to launch a sneak attack was swept up by the 6-armed Naga demon's long tail and was crushed into pieces by the pressure. This unexpected situation caused the defenders of Fort Bador to be thrown into disarray. It wasn't until the 6-armed Naga's physical strength had slightly decreased that the ogre blacksmith Neru, who had a strong physique, used a 2-inch thick ebony flail made of adamantium. If the flail was made entirely out of adamantium, even the ogre Neru wouldn't be able to lift it, that the ogre blacksmith Neru forcefully broke through the sword barrier's defense and counterattacked. Only then did the defenders of the fortress regain some ground. The 6-armed Naga's enchanted blade made of abyss-cold iron added many crisscrossing cracks to Nalu's weapon. The ogre Ironheart was in so much pain that he was about to go mad. He immediately launched a fierce attack on the demon. Seeing their brother rush forward, Paulu and Brew naturally wouldn't just stand by and watch. Which Dr. Paru waved his troll skull staff and cast a weakening curse on the 6-armed Marillion. Due to the demon's resistance, the curse of enfeeblement did not fully take effect, causing him to fall into a powerless state where he could not lift his shoulders or hands. However, it also had the effect of slowing down his movements, creating an opportunity for the clever Brew to launch a pincer attack. The ogre gourmet Brew, who was so smart that he didn't seem like an ogre, had been waiting for a long time. He circled to the side of the 6-armed Marillion and waited for an opportunity to throw out a bramble net with silver-plated iron thorns. At the same time, he used his vaporized body to avoid the demon's coiling tail attack. Generally speaking, the ogre race couldn't crush the powerful 6-armed Marillion in terms of strength. However, there were always exceptions to everything. For example, the ogre Brew was so smart that he didn't seem like an ogre. The ogre Neru, who aimed to become a blacksmith master and weapons master, also far surpassed his peers in terms of strength. The 6-armed Marillion suffered a great loss because of her own inherent knowledge. She directly used her cold iron shield to receive the furious blow from Brew's ebony staff. Immediately afterwards, the cold iron shield shattered. Although the six-armed Marillion had an excellent physique and didn't suffer any injuries such as bone fractures, the arm that held the shield still became sluggish due to some dislocation of muscles under the violent impact. It wasn't clear whether it was because of the pain or because it was used to looking like a snake. The six-armed Marillion realized that if this continued, it would be really dangerous. While carefully dealing with the situation in front of her, the six-armed Marillion used the Tana Re demon specialty, summoning Tana Re. She didn't choose to summon her own kind because, after all, she wasn't as powerful as the wolf snake or the Baylor, who could perform a perfect summon that was guaranteed to succeed. Moreover, the demons that were slightly more well-informed wouldn't respond to the summons of their own kind from the acid fog canyon. No demon wanted to have a few acid fog worms parasitizing their body. Although the six-armed Marillion was strong enough, it still couldn't make the worm tyrant make an exception for her like it did for the wolf snake. For Hezru responded to the summon. These demons that were addicted to fighting were the best candidates to deal with the current situation. These Tana Reed demons were like large toads wearing tumor-like armor. A strong stench of steam and liquid spurted and secreted from the skin of the Hezru demons. As soon as they appeared, they were immersed in the excitement brought about by the battle. Without thinking or hesitation, the Hezru demons rushed to the nearest enemy with their bare hands. Because they were too emotional, the Hezru demons opened their big mouths under their reptilian eyes and didn't burst out with a deafening roar. Instead, they gnashed their teeth and made a disgusting, grinding sound. Their target was the ogre Neru. The brawny man who was focused on hammering the six-armed Marillion was enveloped by the horrible stench of the Hezru demons. Fortunately, his brother, Peru, who always had potions, gave him a dose of the energy potion spray that Keys named Huixiang Vital Energy at the critical moment. It neutralized most of the discomfort caused by the stench. Not only was the ogre greatly affected, but the breathing system of the surrounding fortress defenders was also ravaged by the soul-seeping stench secreted by the Hezru demons. Even the standard pig nose gas masks could not completely block out the stench. On the contrary, Paru's potion spray could not neutralize the stench due to the mass obstruction. For a moment, the soldiers vomited nonstop. Fortunately, the spellcasters in the fortress quickly joined the battle. They cast spells such as Steel Lungs and Air Filtration on the soldiers around the Hezru demons to resist the stench. With the help of the spellcasters, the situation of the battle immediately changed. Soon, the chaos caused by the sudden appearance of the Hezru demons was resolved. Although the Hezru demons were disgusting, after their abilities were suppressed, they could no longer pose a threat to the mercenaries from the other plane of Bator, as well as the military police made up of bone demons and barb demons. Although the six-armed Marillion was difficult to deal with, it was delayed by the violent attacks of the ogre demons. It would be sooner or later killed by the numerous defenders in the fortress. But where did the Leakin go? Was a leader who was said to be serious and responsible was also a fan of posing, using a substitute every day to fool around? Of course not. The Leakin was in the fortress at the moment. If this operation was a hunt, then the six-armed Naga and the Babu demons were the bait. They only needed to attract the attention of Batsu's forces. The one who would deal the final fatal blow to the prey would definitely be the wolf-snake demons themselves. As an experienced hunter who was familiar with hunting techniques, the wolf-snake demon easily selected two of the most valuable targets for itself to attack. The first was the command center of Bator Fortress. According to the nature of the demon's order, as long as the command center was destroyed, the fortress would most likely be paralyzed immediately. However, according to the Leakin's observation, although the number of demons in Bator Fortress was not large, the mercenaries from other planes were not weak as a whole. In addition, the scale of the fortress and the construction of the fortifications were quite impressive. It was likely that there would be powerhouses in the command center, and they would have already set up targeted traps for the beheading operation. It had to be on guard. Therefore, this extremely cunning demon shifted its gaze to the secondary targets in its mind. The spray weapons that the Batsa demon called Hellscream. The wolf-snake demon was not an ignorant person. As a warlord, he was naturally well informed. It naturally knew the various weapon configurations of its old rival, the Batsa demons. The information regarding the defeat of the Calamity Swarm and the Apostles of Calamity in this fortress had been relayed to the Leaken demon through the communication function of a special demon worm. He realized that this weapon had played a crucial role in this. If it could be destroyed, it would certainly cause a great blow to Bator Fortress. This fortress doesn't seem to have been built for a long time. It's not equipped with a magic defense system. It only relies on these spray weapons that can't be underestimated to fight against the Demon Lord's army. If this front tooth is pulled out, how can this group of country bumpkins who were tricked by the Batsa demon to participate in the bloody battle resist the huge number of demons? Don't you think so? The first part was all the evil plans that the Leaken quickly conceived in its mind. The last sentence was a question in the infernal language. The subject of its question was an elite bone demon scythe that had just teleported back to the camp. It was telling something to the barb demon centurion who was waiting in the fortress's artillery position. Without a doubt, the wolf-snake demon raised the long-handled great axe in its hand. It did not even use the blade of the axe. It only used the end of the axe handle, which was inlaid with sharp rubies, to smash the bone demon's organ into pieces. Excellent idea. Revealing itself from the invisibility, the snake-like mouth behind its hyena-like head let out an excited hiss. The Leaken demon swung its giant axe and chopped off the skull of the bone demon that had been smashed in half as if it was demonstrating its power. Then, it kicked a cannon that was named by the creatures of the underworld into two. The barb demon centurion saw the powerful Tanali in front of it and could not help but shout with all its strength, "Enemy attack!" Then, it was interrupted by the Leaken's great axe. Chapter 67. My inherent understanding of Baylor is the most powerful Tana, demon in my mind was rewritten by a sudden change. A wolf-snake demon, just like its appearance of a wolf and a snake. This powerful Tana, demon had both the ferocity of a wolf and the cunning of a snake. His surprise attack was like a hunting activity that he had been familiar with for a long time. First, he released the bait, then handed over the sharp knife. Although the plan was simple, it was very effective. Even in my opinion, the defensive system of the fortress was still remarkable, but it was as if a giant axe had smashed through the armor and hit the vital point. However, this experienced hunter still failed in the end. It was all thanks to the fearless mechanical puppet Mr. Number 21, my familiar and reliable old friend, and Mr. Snade, who was hired by Mr. K's, a Demolic with powerful spellcasting abilities. The two of them worked together to turn the tide. Report of the bloody battle in Reichenaz, Arbis Volume, Chapter 17, Acid Fog Canyon, inside the mercenary fortress in the Bartholomew Plain. The six-armed snake demons and barb demons under the wolf-snake demon's command all used the spell-like ability of summoning Tana, demons to delay the attacks of some of the defenders in the confrontation. Although their failure was a foregone conclusion, they still resisted because their warlord had not given the order to retreat. How could the wolf-snake demon retreat now? The hunting activity was gradually reaching its climax, and it was the critical moment to harvest the prey. This Tana, demon's character was indeed cunning, but when it actually entered the battle, its cruel and violent nature dominated its brain. This was a demon that was never afraid of battle. On the artillery position of Bartholomew Fortress, the barb demon cannoneers spurted blood and burst out screaming because of the giant axe slashing them, making the wolf-snake demon's blood boil and extremely intoxicated. For a moment, the demon, who enjoyed the battle and slaughter, actually forgot its previous plan to prioritize destroying the enemy's artillery. Maybe we should kill these bats of bastards first. Anyway, there's still time. After all, they are weak and cowardly, so it won't take much effort. The wolf and the snake, two heads, one thought. The behavior of this demon warlord seemed to be a satire to its previous criticism of the giant skull demon for not carrying out the mission according to the set goal. But that was the reality. After all, be strict with others and lenient with yourself was the standard behavior of a normal Thaner demon. just like how Keys had activated Peerless Mode in the Demon Army not long ago. The Leakin Demons battle in the Devil's Cannon formation was even better. The axes struck flesh, severed limbs, and blood flew everywhere. Howls of anguish and cries of pain resonated. When the powerful demon warlord faced the barbed magic cannoneer, who was far from his match, the battle was as simple as cutting vegetables. Even if the number of devils was 100 times greater than his, he would still be able to crush them with his strength. Whoosh! A light sound came from behind the demonic wolf snake. The devil who was ambushed didn't even turn his head back. He simply swung his axe and shattered the illusory shark's head that had yet to materialize. Your takeout is here. Strange words spoken in the abyssal language came from the mouth of a construct that looked like a mechanical man. Standing beside him was a female Sawajan high priestess, and the demon overlord reckoned that it was the latter who had ambushed him. 2 small fries, nothing to worry about. The demonic wolf snake, who had always been known for its calmness and wisdom, might have been immersed in the excitement of killing. So his judgment this time was obviously off. If it was reasonable to call the Sawajan high priestess, who looked like a shark, small fries, then calling the mechanical man number 21 the same name was purely a mistake. No matter which angle one looked at it from, such a judgment could be said to be 1,000 miles off, whether it was the appearance or the strength. The demonic wolf snake soon paid the price for its carelessness. The mechanical man warrior's attacks were like a storm, and in the blink of an eye, it suppressed the powerful demon Thanner Re. In a moment, the offensive and defensive positions were different. One must know that when they encountered the Baylor demon previously, it was number 21 who took the brunt of the pressure head-on, creating an opportunity for Keys and the others. The unknown energy surging in the mechanical man provided it with enough strength. The combat skills obtained from various channels, after being optimized by the processing module, allowed it to have the combat ability comparable to a high-level monk. The demonic wolf snake really didn't have a good way to deal with a construct that was spouting all kinds of strange words while fighting. In the past, the enchanted giant axe in its hand, which had the effect of penetrating attacks, was invincible, but it couldn't cut this guy's body. In front of the high-grade goblin alloy, mixed with a large amount of adamantine, the natural weapon that the demonic wolf snake was proud of paled in comparison. Not only that, its snake's kiss, which contained supernatural venom, was also unable to bite down on this construct. In addition, there was also a high-level Sawajan spellcaster who was constantly casting spells to interfere with it. As the battle with the mechanical man was in a stalemate, the demonic wolf snake had to rely on its own race's resistance and immunity advantage to resist the spell damage. Before the demonic wolf snake's judgment of 2 small fries could be heard, it was slapped in the face. Of course, although the mechanical man warrior was strong, it was still a little powerless to capture such a demon warlord in one fell swoop. At the very least, with a spellcaster of the level of the Sawajan high priestess, there was no way to crush this powerful demon Thanner Re. But with a half-lich who had once reached the legendary realm in spellcasting, the situation was very different. An armored arm appeared from invisibility and directly caught the demonic wolf snake's kiss, which was guarding against a pincer attack from behind. Touch of Withering, a new spell that the half-lich had improved after many years of bug removal experiments. Its effect was similar to the Withering spell, which could absorb the moisture in the living body and cause the flesh and blood to wither. But at the cost of the harsh touch spellcasting method, Snade mixed in 2 new features, Life Steal and Regenerative Inhibition, into the spell. Although this spell failed to bug removal, when used on the demonic wolf snake, it had an amazing effect. Because Life Steal and Regenerative Inhibition perfectly restrained the demon Thanner Re's super regeneration ability, this spell caused great damage to the demon that was caught in a fierce battle. How should one describe the specific damage? It was better to chop off its head so that it could at least rely on super regeneration to regrow it. Under the effect of the Touch of Withering spell, the demonic wolf snake's kiss directly withered and propped up on its back like a fried dough stick without water. Even my father didn't hit me like this could perfectly express the demonic wolf snake's thoughts at this moment. Although it didn't know whether or not it had a father or who his father was, the unique spell of the half-lich Snade had indeed brought the demon extreme pain that it had never experienced since its birth. The sudden sharp pain made the demon commander accidentally bite its own tongue, and blood flowed down the corner of its mouth from its hyena-like face. But it was quite stubborn, and this proud demon Thanner didn't cry out because of the pain. The demonic wolf snake used its body to forcefully resist the fist of mechanical puppet number 21 and cast an advanced dispel spell on the activated armor that caused great damage to it. It didn't know that the half-lich's skull was hidden in the terrifying armor, to resolve the spell that the latter might continue to cast after the touch of withering. But its plan failed again because the demonic wolf snake's advanced dispel spell met the half-lich's anti-magic ray. With the advantage of intelligence and supreme magic skill, Snade hit the target first, and the demonic wolf snake's innate spell-like abilities were all ineffective for a period of time. As a result, not only did the advanced dispel spell not work, a series of spells that the demonic wolf snake could cast at will, such as malicious polymorph, blasphemous whisper, deafness, lightning beam, and telekinesis, were all ineffective. Even important life-saving skills, such as advanced invisibility and advanced teleportation, which were convenient for its escape, couldn't be used. At this moment, the demon was in real danger of death. This is not the ability of the activated armor. This is, having lost its spell-like abilities before it could do anything else, mechanical puppet number 21 seized the opportunity and hammered it. The demonic wolf snake, who was struggling to dodge, finally recognized from the magical waves transmitted from the terrifying armor. This is a lich, the strange lich with self-destructive tendencies that was mentioned in the message from the cataclysmic bugs. Although the demonic wolf snake didn't know why the lich, who should have returned to its phylactery, appeared in Fort Bator, it quickly realized that it had to retreat immediately. It mustered all its strength to block the terrifying attacks of the mechanical puppet. It didn't have the courage to attack the lich, an undead creature that was more powerful than itself. Instead, it chose the weakest target, the Sawajin, as its escape route. But once again, it misjudged that the Sawajin had a bit of a temper. The Sawajin summoned two ghost sharks, the undead, giant-toothed sharks that were emitting ghostly flames, blocking the demonic wolf snake's escape route. At the same time, the demonic wolf snake, hidden in the terrifying armor, strengthened the giant-toothed sharks, allowing them to grow energy-absorbing tentacles that could capture the demonic wolf snake and bite it while absorbing its energy. Originally, the summoned creatures were nothing to the demonic wolf snake, which was a powerful Tana demon. But now, the two undead creatures that it could easily crush had destroyed the demonic wolf snake's last hope of escape. Not only did the mechanical puppet warrior's powerful fists and blades were branded on the demon's back like a shadow, but the demonic wolf snake, after strengthening the giant-toothed sharks, also cast another representative spell of the school of necromancy, Finger of Death, with ease. Just like its ferocious name, Finger of Death could instantly kill a living creature. The only way to avoid it was by relying on the body's toughness. And even if the spell was successfully avoided, it would still cause a lot of damage. At this moment, the demonic wolf snake's miserable state could be used as a reference for this spell. Although it relied on the body's toughness to avoid the instant death effect, a wound the size of a pot, lid still appeared on its back. Not to mention the skin and flesh, even the spine that supported the body was exposed. Mechanical puppet warrior no. 21 followed up with a blow to the head, becoming the last straw that broke the camel's back. The demonic wolf snake was dead. In fact, although the demonic wolf snake could indeed suppress the powerful Tana demon with its ability to control magic, but at this moment, Snade had already degenerated into a demonic wolf snake and lost part of his body and power. If not, he wouldn't have hidden inside the terrifying armor to fight. The demonic wolf snake didn't intend to make a move at first, but he was like a web novelist who was encouraged by all kinds of rewards. Snade received the order from Keys through the contract, so he had no choice but to do his best to eliminate the threat to the stronghold's safety. With the death of the demonic wolf snake, the giant axe that accompanied it gradually rusted and decayed. This was the most important basis to determine whether the demon had truly disappeared or not. After confirming the completion of the mission, Sneyd leisurely said, "Death is the most brilliant thief. It will steal everything from the dead." But obviously, the allies who had just experienced a great battle didn't have the same poetic sense. Mechanical Puppet Warrior number 21 waved his fists and asked in a cold electronic voice, "Have you voted?" Chapter 68. Only Riknaz was left to guard the battle command room, which was originally the brain of the mercenary fortress from the other dimension, but the fortress did not fall into chaos. Even though they were ambushed by the wolf-snake demon, the entire camp regained its order after the invaders were eliminated. The artillery support that Keyes had been longing for finally successfully arrived at the battlefield after several twists and turns. However, most of the elite Bone Demon Hook and Sickle soldiers that had followed him into the demon army had been killed. Fortunately, the enhanced artillery shells supported by the artillery once again turned the battlefield into a silver mist. Most of the land demons that could only rely on roaring, cursing, and long-range spells to attack Keyes' assault team fell into the burning itch caused by the silver powder. The frequency and accuracy of their attacks were greatly reduced. After killing the last wave of Tana, Reed demons that could either fly or fly in the air with the help of the magic items bestowed by the gigantic skull demon to besiege the assault team, Keyes finally came close to the brain that commanded the demon army. It really looks like a deformed brain. This was Keyes' intuitive impression of this Obilus demon. Looking at the gigantic skull demon, winking at him and making a charming expression, the blue dragon teenager almost vomited under the influence of the aesthetics accumulated from 2 lifetimes. This was the effect of its innate ability to bewitch and control. If it was not immune, it would fall into a terrible state of worship for the gigantic skull demon's deformed appearance and self-denial of its image, or even self-loathing. That way, it would be easy to fall into the trap of this Obilus demon and be controlled by it. Fortunately, both the Bone Demon and Keyes passed the bewitchment appraisal. This also made the gigantic skull demon, who had confidence in its appearance, very angry. Langa used his shrunken arm to scratch the front armpit of his body, the part that was similar to the brain's temporal lobe, to control his anger. I have to say, this kind of body shape that is similar to exposing the brain is quite convenient. And no, Keyes immediately realized that he was still inadvertently affected and quickly expelled this strange sense of recognition from his mind. At the same time, he raised his vigilance against this ancient Obilus demon. Not to mention Keyes' stress reaction, Giant Skull Demon Langu, who was the nominal commander-in-chief of the demon army, also wanted to curse in his heart at this time, although I don't know if he did. Originally, he was a craftsman who relied on his own skills to make a living. However, he was promoted by a leader who came out of nowhere and became the leader of the 8 Shio clan who carried the burden of war. Yet the soldiers under his command were the Tana Reed demons of the bottomless abyss. While this could be seen as the remnant arrogance and prejudice of the ancient species of Obilus, it was not without reason. In Long Ji's opinion, the Vrox flapped their wings foolishly as they flew in the sky. Their frail bodies were like chickens flying in the sky. Spores would fall from time to time due to their carelessness and hygiene. Although the Hezru walked upright, they preferred to walk on all 4s, which made them look like oversized toads. Their stench was beyond imagination. Before they could affect the opponent, they had to kill a group of allies first. Even if the anchoring base of the animated chain under him was stable, it was also because he used the chain to distance himself from it. In addition, he controlled the chain to clean it several times a day through his mind. Occasionally, there were a few Glabrizu who could fight, but they were selfish by nature and were used to going back on their words. He had to spend his precious energy every day to brainwash them before they were willing to risk their lives and fulfill their responsibilities like qualified demon cannon fodder. In short, the giant skull demon felt that it was truly unlucky for 8 lifetimes to have to lead this bunch of useless people into battle. It was better to rely on oneself than on others. In the end, Lang Gu still had to rely on himself. He could not count on those demons who were trapped in the silver mist caused by the cannons of Bardo Fortress, who were running around like headless flies, and who were yelling and running around aimlessly. Seeing Keys rushing toward him, Giant Skull Demon did not care that he had beheaded another precious firewalker. He had been silently calculating how long it would take for this humanoid creature, who seemed to have transformed from a true dragon, to fall into his trap. Yes, this sinister Obilus demon had prepared a trap. Using his biological modification technology, Lang Gu had designed a plan to rapidly increase the strength of the new Tana Reet demons when he was cultivating the Firewalker. The corresponding price was that the success rate of the acid mist worms hatching from the body of a Baylor was greatly reduced. This was also the reason why the demon lord of the acid mist canyon was a Baylor. There were originally a large number of Tana Reet demons gathered here, but now almost all of them had disappeared. Whether it was the Calamity Worms or the Firewalker, they would only retain part of the original host's abilities after they were born. The former could rely on a large number of acid mist worms and Tana Reet demons to produce a qualitative change through quantitative change, thereby piling up a new race of Tana Reet demons. But for the latter, it was difficult for a single acid mist worm to devour a Baylor that stood at the top of the demon pyramid. Just finding so many Baylors for the acid mist worms to live on was a big problem. Baylors were not cabbages. Even if the former demon lord of the acid mist canyon, Tardheim, had a racial advantage and gathered a large number of Baylors, this large number only referred to about 50 of them. When creating the Firewalker, even with the combination of the Tyrant Worm suppression and Giant Skull Demon Lang Ji's superb biological modification ability, the success rate was not more than half. In theory, they could only create about 20 of these new demons at most. It should be noted that although the Firewalker was powerful, it had only randomly inherited a portion of the Baylor's abilities. If they could only produce some defective products after using so many raw materials, it would be a waste of resources and a loss. The Giant Skull Demons were extremely shrewd, and Lang Gu was no exception. Therefore, when he participated in the creation of the Firewalker, he used the highest level of flesh modification technology of his race, genetic material grafting, to make up for this flaw. Unlike simple tissue and organ transplants, the genetic material mastered by the Giant Skull Demons could provide the recipient with the genetic template of other creatures' recessive abilities. However, this ability would greatly increase the failure rate. It was precisely because of this that the number of Firewalkers that could theoretically be born was cut in half. In the entire acid mist canyon, with the help of the Giant Skull Demons and the Tyrant Worm, only 13 Firewalkers were born. So, what kind of recessive ability did Giant Skull Demon Lang Gu implant in these newborn Tana Reet demons? The answer was the Hound Demon. This creature had the ability to devour and evolve. When it killed a humanoid creature, it could devour its flesh and life essence to promote its own evolution. After fully studying the genetic template of this recessive ability, Lang Gu improved it. The target of devouring was not limited to humanoid creatures. As long as it was a creature with common life, it could be used as nutrients for its evolution. When applied to the new Tana Reet demons like the Firewalker, this ability was an excellent way to make up for its own shortcomings. After all, the Abyss had no lack of Tana Reet demons of all kinds. In addition, the Giant Skull Demon had a little selfish motive. The Hound Demon was an evil creature that belonged to the Order faction. Lang Gu hoped that by grafting its genetic characteristics, his work would be tainted with this Order faction tendency. At least, it would be easier to command. To be honest, this method did have a certain effect. After Key's assault team killed a Firewalker, the remaining Firewalkers did not rush forward like the other Tana Reet demons. Instead, they decisively lowered their altitude and sought cover from the demon army. This showed the increase in their intelligence. And under Lang Ji's instructions, they began to devour a large number of dead Tana Reet demons. They even began to eat the corpses of their own kind that had the most similar life form to them. As one of the creators of these firewalkers, the giant skull demon could clearly feel that the Baylor demon ability that originally only existed in part in these works was rapidly improving and replenishing. Although their overall strength was not comparable to their previous host, their body size was much larger than the Baylor demons, so they had relatively more life force. It had to be said that similar to Keys's learning by sleeping, this kind of growing strength by eating was really an ability that made people envious. One step, two steps. In the blink of an eye, the giant skull demon was counting Keys's steps. When he reached the predetermined mark, a firewalker that had completely mastered the advanced teleportation ability instantly flashed and slammed into him. The burning sky walker had also grown 2 thick arms and automatically grasped the Baylor's expertise in grappling. After successfully slamming into him, a hug kill followed up and tightly strangled the blue dragon teenager who had transformed into a human form. This was not the end. In addition, the spell-like abilities inherited from the Baylor, Decree, Awe, and Firestorm, were cast in succession in order to kill the leader of the Batsu's surprise attack team without any mistakes. This series of attacks almost worked. At this critical moment, Keys could not continue to hide his strength. One of the benefits of the system upgrade before being airdropped, fusing with the life essence of the old gold dragon, was that his resistance to fire had exceeded immunity in the general sense. In the moment when he was distracted by the Decree, the firestorm was unable to cause any damage. And in the midst of being tightly captured, this Keys decisively returned to the body of a true dragon. In terms of hand-to-hand combat ability, the Megalosaurus had always been able to beat everything. What kind of dragon is this? Was I seeing things before? But the effect of the truth spell clearly shows that this is an underage blue dragon. He had no time to pay attention to the giant skull demon, Langu, who was shocked by the strange appearance of Keys' dragon body. For a moment, the dragon fought in the wild. Chapter 69. The dragon fights in the wild, and its blood is black and yellow. Blood with charcoal and flames sprayed everywhere, but did not flow out from the body of the raging dragon. Instead, it was caused by the serious injury of the burning sky walker who attacked Keys. Between the indigo scales were dark golden fascia, and the knotted muscles looked like they were about to burst out of the body. Its fangs and teeth were so sharp that they reflected light, and its eyes were like molten gold. It was embedded in a ferocious head that obviously had the characteristics of a blue dragon. The sour breeze in the air of the acid canyon bitwall made Keys feel a little comfortable. Ever since he entered Avernus from the ash bitwall, he had not returned to his true form many times. Now that he suddenly switched back from his human form, his body felt inexplicably more comfortable. Young blue dragon. Although it was not appropriate to call such an obviously oversized megalosaurus, it was fine for the time being. After all, our protagonist had only been born recently. Kryze clenched his own draconic claw, which he had just used to smash the head of the firewalker that had ambushed him. "This is power," he whispered in a low and concise draconic voice. "This power is really good." With a fierce wind, the megalosaurus directly pounced on the enemy who dared to plot against him. In the body of a true dragon, the cognitive influence of self-denial that the giant skull demon constantly spread was completely eliminated. After all, the charm of the megalosaurus was much higher than this deformed, ugly monster. Stop him. For the first time, the giant skull demon did not use its mental communication ability. Instead, it directly ordered the demon army under its command in the language of the abyss. Its sharp voice and the way the Hezru, which was connected to the animated chain, fell to the ground quickly showed the fear of the Obilus demon at this time. Uncontrollable fear shrouded the giant skull demon. Part of the reason was that it was affected by the megalosaurus's natural deterrence aura, which was also commonly known as dragon's aura. This demon, who was good at bewitching and controlling, was given a taste of its own medicine. Under the command of their creator, the remaining 3 gigantic skulls in the army stopped their evolution by devouring and flew into the sky. Langu threw all kinds of magic items to the other demons as if he was celebrating 11-inch. Boots of Gale, ring of enlargement, scepter of secondary sound wave. Gigantic Skull remembered how to use these magical items, or had completely forgotten their abilities. He took them out to arm his demon army, hoping to use the method of randomly beating the master to death to deal with the evil dragon that was spreading fear in the sky. Not only that, but Langu had also recklessly used the flesh transplant technique, which was regarded as an art by the giant skull demons in the past and had never been operated without careful consideration under the pressure of survival. He created many living chains and used them to capture the Tana Reed demons that had the ability to fly. He pulled over a Vrock subordinate that was hovering at a low altitude, waiting for an opportunity to attack the Megalosaurus. He ignored the Tana Reed demon's anger and begging, tore off its wings without mercy, and then transferred the wings to a six-armed Naga. Similar situations happened continuously. The six-armed Naga with Vrock wings and the Glubriza demon that was carried into the sky by the 6 pairs of Quasit wings were continuously thrown into the sky by this crazy demon leader. You said you can't fly? Then why don't you die? You said the position of the wings is wrong? Then why don't you die? Hurry up. All of you go to the sky and report to that strange, evil dragon. The evil giant skull demon used its bewitching and controlling ability to constantly drive the Tana Reed demons that he had forcibly modified, encouraging them to go to Keys and deliver their heads to him. Although this ancient Obilus demon had always prided itself on being rational, its chaotic and disorderly nature was exposed at this moment. Facing these demons that rushed over to deliver their heads, Keys decisively activated the newly mastered Inferno Force field. The blazing hot field rippled out from within his body, pushing away these demons that attempted to climb onto his body from the inside out. For a moment, the demons that were ignited by the high temperature of the field turned into flying torches. Only the slightly stronger ones were lucky enough to escape death, but they were also severely burned. Swoosh, smack! A tail whip lashed out at the six-armed Naga that had used a high-level teleportation spell to rush to his side. This demon attempted to activate the blade barrier to cut Keys' body, but its plan did not succeed because the Vrom wings that the giant skull demon had randomly transplanted onto its chest disrupted its balance. To be honest, Keys was also a little tired at this time. He had just led the Batsid Devil's assault team to snipe the Firewalker, and then was besieged by a wave of demons. He had no choice but to give up hiding his strength and transform into a true dragon. Now he had to face so many demons, it would be a lie to say that he was not tired. There's no way to kill all the demons. Looking at the situation, there's still a large number of demons coming to this battlefield. The young blue dragon was not immersed in the wanton slaughter. Instead, he had a hint of vigilance in his heart. I have to end this quickly and settle these troubles. Thinking of this, Keys made up his mind and prepared to use a new ability that he had not fully mastered. The Megalosaurus had 3 standard ways of fighting: close combat, magic ability, and the innate ability to breathe. As a blue dragon, Keys' breath was originally a thunderbolt. This was very unfriendly, although it could still hurt the demon Tana Re by increasing the intensity and duration of its output. In the face of so many enemies who were immune to electric shock, it was tantamount to double the effort for half the result and not worth the loss. Fortunately, before being airdropped, Keys had fused with the essence of the old golden dragon, so that he had 2 additional breath abilities: weakening breath and flame breath. These 2 were the innate abilities of the golden dragon. As Keys' dragon egg had undergone the adaptive transformation of the ancient civilization, when it fused with the golden dragon's heart, there was a burst of passive evolution that was almost beyond the endurance of his body. Under the drive of this passive evolution, the inherited ability of the golden dragon's breath was naturally extraordinary. Keys had tried the flame breath once, but in the end, he had to cast the super regeneration spell on his scorched upper and lower jaw. He did not even try the weakening breath at all. Although he could not perfectly control this ability now, Keys had already conceived many other uses, such as the electric arc method, the regenerative oxygen blowing method, and so on. These were some of the very valuable experiments that he wanted to try in the future. But now, in the face of the threat of the demon army and the tactical target of the burning sky walker, who could easily destroy the mercenary fortress from another dimension, Keyes had to try to use the most primitive function of this innate ability. Battle. This was a battle that would determine the outcome. Chapter 70. Taking a deep breath of the sour air, the young blue dragon grabbed the burning sky walker with its claws and opened its mouth wide in an attempt to bite him. Then, the young blue dragon opened its mouth even wider. Throwing away the burning sky walker that he had torn in half, Keyes stared at the remaining 2 burning sky walkers with his eyes that were like molten gold. He could already feel that these behemoths were gradually becoming stronger as they devoured the demon Tanari. As expected, just as Quest had predicted, the remaining 2 burning skywalkers moved their massive bodies in the air and approached the slowly falling corpse of their own kind under the urging of their own instincts. Railgun. The young blue dragon had already swallowed the space belt that contained the remaining silver-containing armor-piercing bullets into his stomach when he transformed. This was how the Megalosaurus usually used magic items. At this time, the electric charge that was brewing in his body instantly surged. Under the effect of a strong electric field, these bullets formed a metal storm and shot out from the blue dragon's mouth toward the preset target. The initial speed of more than Mach 10 gave the bullets a powerful kinetic energy. The bullets tore through the air and became red-hot due to the intense friction on the metal surface, leaving a bright red trail in the air. There was nowhere to hide. There was nowhere to run. The remaining 2 burning sky walkers were instantly riddled with holes by the whistling cannonballs. The smallest wound on their bodies was the size of a wash basin. Most of the wounds penetrated the bodies of the 2 behemoths, causing penetrating damage. Roar! Roar! The burning sky walkers let out deafening roars due to the indescribable pain. Hot and burning blood splashed everywhere. Sure enough, they're transformed from insects. Not all of them are dead. Quest sighed. However, this didn't delay his next wave of attacks. The best way to eradicate evil was to kill a completely dead demon. The young blue dragon. Although it was a little inappropriate to call him that based on his body size, he would just call him that for the time being. Keyes stirred up the energy in his body, allowing the heat to flow from his heart to his bones. He did his best to absorb the energy in order to launch the next attack. He was trying to restrain the weakening and fire breath abilities that he had inherited from the Golden Dragon at the same time and unleash them on his opponents, the Demon Army. It was a battle method that he had never tried before. Therefore, he had to deceive and wound the 2 burning sky walkers who might affect his ultimate move. Reality proved that his strategy was wise. Once the powerful energy was mobilized, there was a tendency to be uncontrollable. The young blue dragon was flying in the air, and his muscles were bulging and taut, as if he was a balloon that could burst at any time. The indigo scales on Keyes' body opened up slightly, and he fell into a momentary state of rigidity. Fortunately, it was a daunting experience without any mishap in the end. It was a pioneering feat that even purebred gold dragons would find difficult to accomplish. The acid fog canyon plain was not completely shrouded in darkness. The thick clouds of acidic gas in the sky would reflect or refract the light of the active volcanoes all over the plain, emitting a faint reddish-brown light. But at this moment, it was as if a sun had appeared in this place. The sun symbolized fire, light, destruction, and death. The blazing beam of light was surrounded by a weakening gas that could weaken life. It was like Sun Wukong swinging the golden cudgel, smashing hard on the heads of the demons that Keyes was facing. There were no screams, no blood. These things that should have appeared were all evaporated and disappeared with the light. The young blue dragon tried his best to adjust the direction of his breath so that the beam of death plowed into the place where the Thanner Reed demons gathered. At this time, this group of underworld creatures who took pleasure in killing and glory in destruction were all frightened. They mustered the last of their strength and scrambled to escape the ultimate killing and destruction brought by the beam of light. As the commander, the Colossus did not hesitate at all. This ancient species of Obilus chose to retreat more decisively than the other Thana demons. He left a mirrored figure in an attempt to confuse Keys. His real body had already secretly opened a directional portal under his feet. This cunning commander of the demon army had set up a beacon for retreat before launching the attack. Fortunately, I prepared for both sides. It's better to be prepared. Langue, who was very concerned about his image, just jumped out of the portal. He raised his deformed hands and brushed the dust on his body because of the shockwave. Yes, it's better to be prepared. A terrifying armor exuding strong magic fluctuations came in front of the Colossus through the portal that had not been completely closed. In the mercenary fortress from another dimension, the smoke of the battle gradually dissipated. Although the remaining demons were still attacking the city, it was no longer a big deal. Everyone witnessed the commander, Keys, returning to his megalosaurus form when he led the charge and broke through the enemy lines. Their hearts were much calmer. Perhaps among these people, except for the spellcasters who were usually well-learned, there were not many who could accurately assess the power of this young blue dragon's last attack and how terrifying it was. But after all, the Megalosaurus was a creature that was well known in the multiverse. With such a strong person in charge, it would undoubtedly arouse the fighting spirit of these guys. Of course, not everyone was encouraged. At least, the former sacred samurai Jinsen was not. In his opinion, this war was a meaningless fight between the evil camps, and the only possible meaning of its existence was to let as many evil creatures as possible destroy each other in this fight. The God of justice and law is above. I am in the abyss, and I have no choice. Only by doing my best to kill the enemy, or be killed, can I wash away my sins. Jensen repeatedly recited his prayer in his heart. As a condemned sacred samurai, he could only pray silently in the depths of his heart. He had to follow the maxim of silence. Before his sins were washed away and he was redeemed, this former sacred samurai would no longer have the right to appeal and argue. Although his clothes were ragged and he could not speak, Jensen knew that he had not been abandoned by his faith. His arm that raised the shield to block was still as steady as before, and his strength when slashing with the sword seemed to be stronger than before. But even if this devout believer's faith was firm, he would still feel tired. He did not know how many times he had broken the demon's head, but his movements had also changed a little, and the damage to his weapon and equipment made him even more helpless. He could have a firm belief as support, but his weapon and equipment were not. Just as he once again blocked the claw attack of a timid demon squad captain, the shield he used to block suddenly shattered. This change caused a long sword that was originally thrust to be tightly grasped by the opponent, and at this moment, a sneak attack from a Babu demon that had been lurking for a long time came unexpectedly. Jensen struggled to pull back the long sword. He wanted to use the blade that was getting more and more chipped to block the thorns that were coming at him. This might work, or it might not. After all, this weapon seemed to be on the verge of completely shattering. Hey boy, watch out. A soft reprimand in Inferno reached Jensen's ears. A figure with a ridiculous round hat flashed past him. The man used a pair of spiked gloves and directly smashed the attacker's head. This is not the place to be distracted. For this unexpected assistance, Jensen just nodded and did not directly thank him in words. This was not in line with the etiquette of the sacred samurai. Chapter 71. For the former Saint Samurai Jensen, faith was not only a form of worship for a god, but also a way of life. If others were to lend him a helping hand, he should be the first to thank them. But because of the shackles of the maxim of silence, Jensen could only hide these words in his heart and look forward to the future. If he had the chance, he would repay this debt. About half an hourglass had passed since the last demon that attacked the fortress was killed. Without the urging of the Batsu military police, the mercenaries from the other planes who participated in the defense of the fortress began to take turns to repair and reorganize their hard-won defense. Jensen's originally broken armor and weapons were completely destroyed in the last battle. Thus, he received some new supplies from the military supply department: a broad-bladed short sword, a round shield made of wrought iron, a half-body armor with a helmet, a spear more than 7 feet long, and a few throwing axes. These equipment were actually considered valuable military equipment in any material plane, but in the Batsu's fortress, they were only common goods. The demons have really swindled the wealth from all corners of the multiverse and poured it all into the bottomless pit of the Blood War. Jinsen, who was once a saint samurai, used oiled sandpaper to polish the edge of his weapon. Although Jinsen's judgment was wrong, it was not completely unreasonable. For the creatures of the lower realms, although wealth was good food to satisfy the evil desire of greed, any Batsu with some ability would not refuse to collect wealth to show their strength and power. But to them, or perhaps to those demons in high positions, the philosophical confrontation between order and chaos was not only related to their strength, but also the meaning of their existence. Thus, in the Blood War, the Batsu Devil would never be stingy with their wealth. Moreover, most of the money was distributed to the middle and lower-ranked demons by their superiors. Being generous with other people's money, the demons naturally did not have any psychological burden. In fact, this was because Key's fortress was only a mercenary fortress from another plane. Some of the pure Batsu Devil vanguards that were also airdropped into the Acid Fog Canyon plane actually had more ample supplies. However, the better the equipment, the more dangerous the opponent was. An army composed entirely of Batsu Devil walked on the land of Acid Fog Canyon. They cautiously and swiftly traversed the terrain filled with ravines and hidden underground volcanoes. Unlike Keyes, who had airdropped the entire fortress into this plane, this vanguard of Bator adopted a mobile warfare strategy. Through constant movement, they carefully dealt with small groups of Dakri demons, not giving the enemy any chance to use their advantage in numbers to surround and annihilate them. The reason for this tactic was that the senior devil in charge of this troop was extremely familiar with it. He was once a god, worshipped by a centaur tribe in an unknown country in ancient times. He was a tyrannical god. A tyrannical god was a relatively rare type of demon that did not have its own race. As spirits and existences worshipped by ignorant primitive mortals in the image of gods from the dark and ignorant era, these primitive gods were abandoned and forgotten when true gods and beliefs were born. Therefore, when hell opened its doors to them, these false gods gladly accepted the invitation and gift from the 9 hells and transformed into Batsu demons. As a totem worshipped by the centaurs, this tyrannical god was like a centaur that had been magnified dozens of times. However, after experiencing Bator's gift, its original 4 hooves turned into curled beast claws, wings covered in scales grew out of its back, and 2 iconic horns that many Batsu devil demons had grew out of its head. This commander was once a god worshipped by the Centaur tribe in Bloodshed Land. Therefore, after joining Bator, he had to use his expertise in the corresponding field to repay the grace of the 9 hells. As a being worshipped by mortals, every tyrannical god was always thinking about returning to the material plane with the power they had obtained in Bator and picking up the glory that had disappeared. However, such a wish required an equivalent exchange in Bator. Because of the venture capital of the 9 prisons of Bator, it was even more difficult for the tyrannical god to go to the material plane than other Batsu devils, unless they could obtain enough merit points. The tyrannical god, who was leading the troop forward, was very excited at this time. According to the agreement signed with the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics and Security Bureau of Bator's First Layer territory, as long as they completed the current task of building Hell Fortress, they would accumulate enough merit points to return to the material plane. In order to ensure the successful completion of the agreement, the tyrannical god not only risked his life to come to the bottomless abyss, but also took out his long-accumulated wealth to recruit a group of powerful Batsu vassals, such as the Dinar demons and the Blood Armor demons. He also equipped them with luxurious weapons and equipment. Even the scouts of this army were made up of some strong, 6-legged scythe worms carefully selected from the 9 hells. As a false god of the centaur tribe's bloodshed land, this tyrannical god was very familiar with the fighting style that came and went like the wind. Therefore, after being teleported to Acid Fog Canyon, this Batsu army followed this style. First, the tireless six-legged scythe worms covered in chitin shells would spread out to detect the situation on the marching route, and then the army completely composed of demons would pass through. If they encountered a small group of Tana Reet demons, they would swarm forward and use their comparative advantage in numbers and combat power to quickly flatten the enemy. If they encountered a large group of demons, this Batsu army could also avoid them. After all, the tyrannical god was also a type of demon, and they all had the ability to analyze rationally. As long as this operation could successfully open Hellgate Fortress, it would be a great achievement. There is no need to fight to the death with the demons in the abyss. Sitting in the army and listening to the reports from the Scythe Worm scouts one after another, the tyrannical god commander constantly adjusted the marching route on the precious map in his hand. At the same time, he was also paying attention to the steel chariot pulled by hundreds of iron-armored demons in the middle of the army. The steel chariot was built by the tyrannical god, and its purpose was to serve as the foundation of Hellgate Fortress. Inside, dozens of spellcasters were taking turns to chant spells and other preparatory work day and night. This was already the 7th day so far. There were less than 3 days before Hellgate Fortress would completely connect with Avernus and establish a stable spatial passage. Stroking the scepter in his hand, the tyrannical god was already imagining the wonderful scene of returning to the material plane and reclaiming his glory and being worshipped by millions. Fortunately, I was willing to spend money to purchase the topographic map of this plane from the great merchant Yugros. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to pull such a large Hellgate Fortress through the abyss. Chapter 72. Acid Fog Canyon, the 479th level of the abyss. Due to the tyrant worm's creation of the acid fog worms, it had transformed the environment of this plane, which was originally soaked in strong acid, into some vitality. However, the cracked land and the dense acid fog still affected the steel chariots that were moving quickly. Every 2 days, the chariot, which carried dozens of spellcasters in Hellgate Fortress, had to change its worn wheels and tires regularly. A group of imps, under the supervision of the Gore Fiend, were repairing the chariot while smearing the Batsu Devil's acid-resistant blood on all the parts of the chariot to isolate it from the acid fog. The demon's vision was far superior to that of mortals, so they could see that in the distance there were scattered Tana Reet demons that had begun to gather and observe the situation of the troops. Fortunately, the Scytheworm scouts and the invisible Tana's quick response team had already gone to deal with these loose ends. The commander only needed to wait for their good news. However, the tyrant god was not careless. He knew that this was actually the most dangerous moment for the mobile troops. Previously, when the chariot was being repaired, there were 2 encounters with the demons that had gathered. It was only because of the large number of high-grade demons in the troop that they were able to wipe out the enemy. The tyrant god used a Dark Abode spell-like ability once a day to create a temporary command post for himself. Walking in, he took out a scroll map that he had bought from the skin of the Tana Reet demons and studied it carefully. According to the Yugoloth, this map is one of the safer routes that they had explored in the course of their trade. However, there are too many worms in this level, and the laws of the entire plane are leaning towards these life forms. It's not just the abyssal creatures, but also the lower-level demons will become targets if they are not careful. The tyrant god commander's thick fingers tapped on the steel desk that was covered with scrolls. Every tap was like the sound of a hammer hitting an anvil. Seeing that the troops had been moving for nearly 8 days, the disadvantages of abandoning the land of Avernus and engaging in guerrilla warfare showed. Most of the low-grade demons could not violate the worm law of this plane, and their bodies had begun to show signs of being parasitized by the acid fogworms. The situation wasn't serious at the moment, but that was only because the tyrant god and other high-ranked devils had gathered together, and the Order of Bartho had suppressed the spread of the parasites. The commander of the tyrannical divine demons was very worried that if they were besieged by more Tanakis in the next 2 days, once the losses of the intermediate and senior demons reached a critical threshold, the outbreak of the worm parasitism crisis among the lower demons would very likely be the last straw that broke the camel's back. We have to solve this problem. After all, we're already at the final stage of this quest. We can't afford to make any mistakes. Tyrannical divine demon stroked his chin, thinking of various possible solutions. A demon fly acting as a signaler disrupted the commander's train of thought. The demon fly, which looked like a child, seemed to be a combination of a fat human baby and a giant fly that had its fill of blood. As it flew through the gates of the evil abode, it was immediately captured by a force field spell cast by the tyrannical demon. The high-ranked devil, whose thoughts were interrupted, was naturally very angry, but he didn't kill the demon fly in front of him. At least, he wouldn't do so before he saw the image transmitted by the demon fly. The demon fly could record everything it saw through a spell-like ability called the Eye of Hell, and then transmit the image to other creatures. This was also the most important thing for all who endured the annoying buzzing in their hearts to enslave the demon. The image transmitted by the demon fly made the tyrannical divine demon, who was lying behind the desk, stand up on all fours. Previously, Adina and a group of scythe insectoids had formed a rapid response team to hunt down the demons who had gathered to watch the Batsu's army. But who would have thought that the 2 demons sent by the enemy would be so easy to kill? The 2 demons seemed to be made up of an unknown number of entangled acid mist worms, and the tyrannical divine demon recognized them. They were 2 groups of cataclysmic worms. However, this was rather abnormal. According to the information he'd traded with the Yugoloths, while the cataclysmic worms were a type of powerful Tana reed demon that could deal with the scythe insectoids, it was too difficult for them to attack and kill Adina, even if 2 groups of cataclysmic worms attacked at the same time. The tyrannical divine demon had spent a lot of money to recruit these Dina, and these high-ranked Batsa devils were in preparation for becoming pit fiends. They were the elites of the elites, and the most outstanding of them were even given the domineering title of Overlord Demon. For the first time, the tyrannical divine demon wanted to listen to the buzzing of the demon fly's messenger. He wanted to hear more about the image in detail. However, his thoughts were once again in vain. From the Batsu's temporary camp, the unique roar of the blood-armored fiends could be heard. When the tyrannical divine demon rushed out of the command post, the scene made his eyes pop out of their sockets. The heavily protected steel chariots had been overturned, and the Hell's Gate fortress on them had collapsed into a pile of ruins. The flesh of the lowly demons, one of the main ingredients, was like canned fruit that had been knocked over and scattered all over the ground, covering the ravines of the Valley of Acid Fog. The instigator of all this was now standing in front of hundreds of blood-armored fiends that had already gone mad. His casual attitude was infuriating. "Kill this Tana reed bastard for me." The tyrannical divine demon didn't actually need to give the order. The blood-armored fiends launched a swift attack as soon as they formed up. Those in the front raised their spears and pierced forward, while those in the back used their energy crossbows that could shoot Hell's force to harass the enemy. As the devils of Badhor who hated the Tana re-raced the most, the moment the blood-armored fiends and demons met, it would only end when one side was completely annihilated. Not only that, but the other high-ranked devils in the camp, like the Dina, also spontaneously joined the ranks of those who dared to trespass in a Bader's camp. For a moment, the spirit of unity, which shouldn't exist in the underworld, erupted among the soldiers of this army. The tyrannical divine demon, who was completely enraged by the unforeseen event, also brazenly attacked. This huge Batsu devil's 4 claws soared into the air, and it flapped its slightly smaller wings and flew toward the enemy. At this moment, the commander seemed to have returned to the time when he was worshipped as the god of war by the Centaur tribe. He resolutely launched a charge toward his target. In the face of all kinds of attacks that came like raindrops, this guy who had single-handedly killed his way into Batsu's camp said calmly, "Command, mass deterrence." As soon as he finished speaking, The command spell seemed to form a substantial ripple that spread to half of the camp in the blink of an eye. All the creatures within this range were forced to use their willpower to resist. If they didn't succeed, they would enter a state of shock and stupefaction. Most of the blood-armored fiends who were closest to the spell directly fell into a state of shock because of this sentence. Chapter 73. As a former false god, the tyrant god was immune to the effects of the law, intimidation. Some of the more powerful Huna demons were also released from a state of awe. They were only slightly affected by it. However, the other Batsu in the camp were not so lucky. Most of the devils had fallen into a sluggish state and could only rely on the power of their souls to break free of the restraints on their bodies. Those who were lucky enough to escape had their strength greatly reduced due to the difference between their souls and their bodies. "Who art thou?" The enraged tyrant god commander attempted to use the call to disturb his opponent while waving the two-headed spear he usually used as a scepter at the terrifying enemy without hesitation. The two-headed spear's attack did not work. A force field palm appeared out of thin air and blocked the Batsu commander's attack. The tyrant god recognized this spell, Big B's grappling palm. To be able to casually cast a 7th grade spell with a force field that was comparable to his full-powered attack, the enemy was a powerful spellcaster that could not be underestimated, regardless of whether he was a warlock or a wizard. "I am Hemtar, the second body of a dragon, the enemy who easily blocked the tyrant god's attack," said calmly. Sudden shock was an apt description of the former false god's feelings at this moment. The tyrant god was not an ignorant person. In fact, from the fact that he was willing to spend a large sum of money to purchase a relatively safe route from the merchants of Yugros, one could see how much importance he attached to the intelligence-gathering work of this military operation. Hemtar, an independent, intelligent organ that the tyrant worm had named after its creator, had long been included in the Abyssal Expedition Memorandum by the tyrant worm. Although there was not much reliable information about it, just the fact that it was a part of the body of the tyrant worm, which was as powerful as a true god, was enough to prove the degree of threat this Hemtar posed. Even if the tyrant god was once a false god, his authority could not compare to the demon lord who ruled over an entire level of the acid fog canyon. Moreover, this was an away battle in the enemy's territory. The Batsu commander immediately understood the contents of the message sent by the Fly Devil. The complete annihilation of the scout team, led by the Quanas, was probably due to this person in front of him. Of course, since things had already turned out this way, the tyrant god had no reason to sit still and wait for death. Moreover, there was no such thing as surrendering on the bloody battlefield, and there was no preferential treatment among the devils and demons. He could only use all his strength to fight for a way out. But what puzzled him was that after nearly 8 days of rapid march, he had clearly verified the safety of the Yugros trade route. So why did such a deadly second body of a dragon suddenly appear out of nowhere? He was puzzled, but there was no time to think about it, because after Helmuter introduced himself, he began to attack fiercely like a storm. Due to being nourished by the power of faith of the Centaur tribe, the tyrant god had a great advantage in both damage resistance and immunity compared to other Batsa devils. Most tyrant gods were easily immune to the damage caused by cold, electric, flame, poison, and sound waves. Therefore, Hemtar's tactic against this great demon was to first use a field spell to compress its space of movement, and at the same time, use field control spells such as Petrification Ray, Weakening Curse, and Anti-Magic Ray to weaken the defensive advantage of the idol armor on the surface of the opponent's body. Then, through the Summoning Pagoda, he dealt with the other Batsu devils that swarmed over that did not let himself fall into a state of being pincered. Although Hemtar's tactic was simple, it was extremely efficient. Although he had now come to the camp of a Batsu devil army alone, it should be noted that this camp was in the acid fog canyon of the bottomless abyss. Thus, when a demon lord's avatar activated the Summoning Pagoda, the demons that responded quickly neutralized the tyrant god camp's advantage in numbers. Most of the blood-armored fiends had just recovered from the effects of the intimidation of order, and they had to rush around to put out the fire. They used spells similar to dimensional anchors to prevent the demons from rushing in after responding to the summons. They had not even truly fought the enemy that had caused all this, and they had no choice but to withdraw from the battle between the higher-ups. This situation made these Batsu soldiers who had dedicated their lives to bloody battles extremely angry, but there was nothing they could do. The only ones who could help the commander of the tyrant god camp were the Hornas that had been recruited at a high price. This group of Batsu elites were the elites of the elites, and the strength that they had constantly trained to become pit fiends was finally put to use. They were extremely brave warriors and would rarely choose to retreat, even in the face of a powerful enemy. The glory of killing an Abyssal Lord's avatar motivated them to fearlessly brandish their spikes and chains as they charged through the air. However, there were two other uninvited guests of the Thanner re-blocking their path of charge. If the tyrant god had looked carefully, he would have realized that these two pagodas were the two calamity bugs that had annihilated the scout team. These two calamity bugs were not ordinary calamity bugs. They had been born even earlier than the dragon's secondary body, Hemtar. They were primitive creatures created by the tyrant worm, and were the source of all calamity bugs. If one looked carefully, they would be able to see some clues from the color of their bodies. The acid mist worms that made up the bodies of these two cataclysmic worms had a rather obvious structure, and the color of their bodies was closer to the dark brown skin of the worm tyrant. Not only did they possess physical strength far surpassing their peers, but they also possessed the body structure of an artisan that could store magical power. My name is Bug Legion, because we have the numbers. Come into my bowl, you flying bighorn goats. Where do we have a bowl? Shut up. Why don't you just eat it, just like what you did before? Uh-huh, seconded. Seconded. The calamity bugs' bodies were constantly transmitting the words of the acid mist worms. It was as if they were responding to the purest law of chaos in the abyss, and they had become even more powerful. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several acid mist worms that were rooted in the bodies of these demons shot out like sharp swords. Most of them pierced through the bodies of the calamity bugs that were dodging the potions. Although this attack couldn't kill a greater devil, the two groups of calamity bugs were like fishing lines being reeled in. They dragged the dreadnought devils, who had their hearts pierced, to the ground of the acid fog canyon. During this period, the victims all swung their weapons, either slashing or poking at the worm's fishing line that caused great damage to them. However, only a few of them were able to achieve the desired effect. Most of the weapons of the Huna demons were repelled by the tough and slimy worm skin and did not have any effect. The calamity bugs that were dragged down came into close contact with the ground and fell to the ground. I'll kill you while you're down. Don't let the wrong one go. Slaughter these flying bighorn goats. The cataclysmic swarm would not let go of the opportunity to beat the enemy while they were down. Just like Orochimaru's hidden shadow multiple snake hand in Naruto, an unknown number of acid mist worms gushed out of the cataclysmic swarm and attacked the Kunonaji victims who were dragged to the ground. These acid mist worms were responsible for scaring, restraining, attacking, and so on. They were able to achieve a multi-hit combo, and the calamity bugs that were tangled with them could only grind against the ground. Naturally, the calamity bugs that were still in the air would not give up resisting just because their companions were in trouble. Instead, this angered the Batsu elites. They used lightning bolts and fireballs to attack their enemies, while also using their phantoms to interfere with the calamity bug senses. However, no matter what, these calamity bugs were successfully restrained by the two first-generation calamity bugs. At the same time, the tyrannical deity commander could only face the battle with the dragon subbody, Hemtar, alone. A total of 4 giant force field hands blocked off all the tyrannical deity commander's movements. At this time, he did not even dare to use the strategy of leaping into the air to attack the enemy, because that might fall right into the trap of the demon lord's evil clone, and he would be in an even more passive situation. Risking being hit by a few debuff spells, the tyrannical deity commander used all his strength to break through a summoned Bigby palm with his double-headed spear and jumped out of the encirclement. He waited for an opportunity and used his war priest domain ability to summon a wave of divine power to attack the troublesome enemy. As a former false god of the bloodshed domain, he knew how important it was to seize the initiative in battle and let the enemy fall into his own rhythm. Therefore, the Batsu commander had no intention of stopping or retreating. While the dragon subbody was busy resisting the divine power and had no time to care about anything else, the tyrannical deity commander buffed his double-headed spear with enchanted weapon and flame strike. With a leap, he stabbed the extremely dangerous weapon into the body of a rampaging calamity bug. Only by getting rid of these two troublesome fellows and having the calamity bugs cooperate with him could he possibly resist the Abyssal Lord subbody. While the first-generation calamity bugs were certainly outstanding in combat, they could not match the tyrannical deity commander in a one-on-one fight, not to mention that the latter had the advantage of ambushes. Thus, when the twin-headed spear that was emitting sparks due to the buff of the spell was stuffed into the body of the fiend worm, the lively swarm of calamity worms was instantly blown into countless pieces. The other calamity bugs that were scared out of their wits not only had to fend off an attack from the tyrannical deity commander that had activated its peerless form, but also a large group of calamity bugs that attacked with hatred. It only took a moment for the calamity bugs to walk down the same path as its companions and be torn apart by the furious Batsu devil. However, when the tyrannical deity commander and the calamity bugs turned their weapons to their powerful opponent, Helmuter, they found that the Abyssal Lord had already recovered from the divine power attack and was even watching with great interest as the tyrannical deity commander and his calamity bugs were wiped out. Not a bad ambush, tyrannical deity commander. But do you know why I can only stand here? Before the Demon Lord's clone could finish speaking, a gigantic maw tore through the cracked earth of the acid fog canyon and swallowed the tyrannical deity commander and most of his subordinates. The earth beneath the dragon's body continued to bulge as a huge tongue as thick as the neck of a megalosaurus connected to Helmuter's feet and lifted him out of the maw's range. Because I never had freedom either, ha ha ha. The tyrannical deity commander was dead. The Batsu devil that had gone to the material plane to recover its past glory, along with the Batsu expeditionary army that carried its power to realize its dream, had become snacks in the tyrant worm's mouth. Chapter 74. Acid Fog Canyon, Bartholomew's Mercenary Fortress. Keyes looked at the dissected demon body on the dissection table and fell into deep thought. One of the benefits of being a young blue dragon was that he was much bolder. Keyes would have been scared out of his wits if he was still the programmer he used to be, let alone being able to do the research himself. After the continuous battles with the Thanner Reet demons, Ogre Shaman Palu had more research materials in his hands. Although the demons in the lower realm were all spirit and body as one, most of the time, when they were destroyed, their bodies would immediately rot and die. But as if to prove the chaotic nature of the bottomless abyss, there would always be some exceptions, especially when the bloody battle broke out and thousands of demons died in the battle. This situation was not uncommon. Ogre Palu, who always had potions, was not as smart as Brew, nor as strong as Brew, but compared to his two brothers, he was calmer and more dependable. Not only had he fully inherited the voodoo techniques from the trolls, but he had also developed them through continuous study. Thanks to the system's knowledge of demon anatomy obtained in Avernus, the demons had done this kind of work many times. Palu could skillfully use a foot-long scalpel to cut and separate the flesh and blood of the tough Thanner re-demons. A large number of fresh materials had been obtained in the recent battles, which gave him the opportunity to use his knowledge of voodoo to research and develop new types of potions. These three demons are Vrak, Bugala, and Dretch. They are also the Thanner re-race's biological samples that we have obtained the most besides the acid fogworms. Palu picked up the sterilized scalpel and wiped it on his leather apron to remove the residual alcohol on it. He pointed at the dissected specimens one by one. Through the physiological dissection of at least 100 of these creatures, I found that although the Thanner Reet demons have different appearances and internal organs, even if they are of the same type, there are slight differences in their individual structures, but there is a common organ or tissue inside their bodies. Paulu used the scalpel to cut the demon's limbs that were fixed to the dissection table by long nails. The silver-plated thin blade easily tore open the skin and muscles that were no longer tough due to death. Paulu had done the same job many times, so he seemed to be at ease. The sharp vision of a megalosaurus allowed Keyes to clearly see the lymphatic structure inside the incision made by the ogre voodoo doctor. However, the color of the lymphoid tissue of this Tana-Reed demon was very similar to the surrounding muscle tissue. It was like a wriggling earthworm covering its entire body. If not specifically pointed out, it would be easily overlooked. These lymphoid tissue-like structures are also present in the low-level acid mistworms. Paru immediately dissected another acid mistworm that was still alive, as if he had seen through Quitha's guess. Then he explained, in the voodoo technique I inherited, there's a kind of knowledge about how to perform a bloodline curse. The key to successfully performing it is to first find the bloodline commonality of the target of the curse. Therefore, I guess this is the bloodline commonality of the Tana-Re race. That's a very good idea. Extremely sharp observation skills and practical skills. Snyder, who had just finished the work assigned by Keyes, couldn't help but praise Paulu after hearing his explanation. This Demolic had always been very enthusiastic about various research works. He didn't have any prejudice against Paulu's views just because he was an ogre that the Drows didn't think highly of. Keyes also somewhat agreed with the ogre voodoo doctor's point of view, but he still had some doubts. As a creature of the underworld, in fact, life doesn't need the support of any body organs to exist. The concept of existence itself is the basis of its existence. We have also discovered through previous dissections that some demons have digestive organs, such as intestines, but they don't have excretory organs. Therefore, they don't swallow food to maintain their lives, but simply to satisfy their body's desire for flesh and blood. Moreover, even if they're the same kind of Tana-Re demon, their internal organs may not be exactly the same. Their various organs are like fillers that are randomly created. Then, what is the special function of this universal tissue or organ? The question hit the nail on the head, and Paru snapped his fingers excitedly, signaling everyone to calm down. He wanted to use the experiment to tell everyone the answer to his discovery. The ogre voodoo doctor transformed into a skilled anatomist. He first cut the smallest dretch specimen on the dissection table and meticulously separated the muscles on the arm of this weak Tana-Re demon from the demon lymph hidden in it. Then, he completely removed the demon lymph that existed in the living acid mistworm that had been skinned, leaving only a small part connected to the brain. Finally, he implanted the demon lymph in the arm of the dretch into the body of the worm. Just as he was about to ask for help, the Demolic Snyder, who had been watching the experiment for a long time, cast an elementary restoration on the worm. Under the effect of the restoration spell, the experimental carrier implanted with a part of the dretch's demon lymph quickly recovered its vitality that was gradually dissipating due to the dissection. Casting a healing spell like elementary restoration required the caster to continuously expend magic power. To a Demolic, this loss was simply insignificant. But this top-level undead creature, who was a master of magic control, immediately noticed a trace of abnormality. Casting such a spell on the worm seemed to consume a little more magic power. Snyder immediately got the answer he wanted. The acid worm that was fixed with a long nail on the dissection table was healed by the restoration spell. And this was not all. The dretch's demon lymph tissue had an effect. The worm's body was constantly twisting and twisting. Its original body was constantly expanding, and the lich's excess restoration energy provided energy for this process. A new characteristic was reflected on its body. The body of the worm gradually turned into the shape of a demon's arm. From its color and size, it was very similar to the arm of the dretch. The ogre witch doctor was very satisfied with the results of his experiment. He took the worm out of the nail and threw it to the Demolic Snyder, who had new body. The first Tana-Re demons were produced after the ancient Obilus lords threw the fallen souls of mortals into the abyssal blood pool. Most of the Tana-wreathed demons were originally abyssal worms, a type of worm that looked very similar to the acid mist worms. These worms then accumulated energy by devouring each other, and the energy they accumulated drove them to evolve abnormally, thus producing all kinds of Tana-wreathed demons. In theory, all Tana-wreathed demons use the same set of evolutionary templates, but because of the different souls that fell into the abyss, they evolved in different directions. Through this experiment, I can draw the following conclusion. The evolutionary template in the demons never disappeared, but it was passed down as a common bloodline. At the same time, the dominant part was carried by the demon's lymphatic tissue, which affected the appearance and ability of various demons. Chapter 75. Not only did Peru's experiment prove his conjecture, but it also proved that one could not judge a book by its cover. Even among the ogres, who were known for their stupidity, there were still individuals as extraordinary as the three of them. Mr. Peru, how can your research help us in our current situation? The goblin Renaz was the one who asked the question. This goblin great engineer was different from Snade, who was also a researcher. He was more rational and focused on the practical aspects of his research. Peru seemed to have expected this question. He took out 2 to 3 materials from his potion pouch and took out some demon lymph from the Vrock body on the dissection table. Then, as he softly chanted a voodoo spell that others could not even pronounce, he weighed the proportions of the ingredients he took out before putting them together with the Vrock's demon lymph into a crystal bowl beside him. He then crushed them and mixed them well. Please help me hold that mutated acid mistworm in place, Peru said to Snade, who had just received the mutated acid mistworm and was carefully inspecting it. Snade readily accepted the request. He admired the ogre voodoo doctor's meticulous work and was naturally willing to be an assistant for this experiment. With just a snap of his fingers, an invisible force field claw firmly bound the experimental subject and slowly moved it closer to Paru so that he could conduct the experiment. After nodding to express his gratitude, the ogre voodoo doctor once again chanted a voodoo spell while moving his hands according to a certain rhythm. Following his voice and movements, the mixture that he had mixed into powder immediately turned into a cloud of thick fog. Under Peru's command, this cloud of fog shrouded the mutated acid mistworm. Then, something shocking happened. The experimental mannequin's form changed again. The acid mistworm that was shrouded in the fog of the potion, which had already grown a Dretch's forearm, was squeezed back into its body like clay. At the same time, wart-like protrusions that could only be found under the Vrock's feathers that were used to produce spores slowly appeared on the unlucky experimental subject. However, perhaps because there was not enough energy to support it, or because the total amount of substances in the potion was not enough to induce its evolution, the evolution of this acid mistworm had just begun to stagnate. Not only that, but due to the Demolika's restoration spell, the vitality of the experimental body had greatly increased. But now, the acid mistworm, which had fallen into a stagnant state of evolution, began to show a large number of wrinkles all over its skin due to dehydration, and it also emitted a decaying smell that only old creatures would have. This was very abnormal in itself. The demons of the lower realm, as beings of spirit and body, theoretically would never naturally age. Ogre Voodoo, Dr. Paru, looked at the results of his experiment with satisfaction. He explained to everyone, I used a voodoo poison that is often used to stimulate the bloodline potential of living creatures. However, the rate of effectiveness of this potion is actually very low. It was originally developed by my troll teacher in order to increase the strength of the tribe. However, among the newborn cubs that were fed the medicine, this medicine only had a slight effect on the 3 of us brothers. Paru's expression became slightly gloomy when he mentioned his teacher, who had selflessly taught him his skills. He put down the tools in his hand and picked up the troll skull staff that was placed next to him. He paused for a moment before continuing. In fact, the reason why this potion is not very successful is because it lacks a guiding material, a genetic material that can be compatible with the blood of the user, but also belongs to a higher level of life. The demon lymph of the Vrak is a very good material to guide the evolution of an acid mistworm. At this point, there was no need to go into details. At this moment, everyone present was far more intelligent than mortals, and they quickly caught up with Paru's train of thought. For ordinary demons, evolving to a higher level of life was their lifelong pursuit. For them, this was not only a desire for strength, but also a necessity to carry out their will to destroy. Whether it was the weak Dretch or the powerful Baylor, they were all under the influence of the abyss, will to constantly seek to increase their strength and practice more crazy methods of destruction. However, the evolution of demons could not go against the law of conservation of energy. The will of the abyss could not let them create something out of nothing. Only by accumulating enough strength could demons successfully evolve to a higher level of life. This was one of the remaining laws of order in the chaotic abyss. The purpose of Paru's potion was to induce the acid mistworm as an experimental subject to enter a state of evolution. However, the worm itself lacked the energy needed to complete the evolution, so it overdrafted its own life force and became half-dead. Of course, inducing demons to evolve could create more powerful demons in other abyss levels. However, due to the worm law of the acid mist canyon, almost all the demons that lived here were parasitized by the acid mistworms. Most of the power that the demons painstakingly accumulated for a long time was stolen by the parasites. After the evolution, there would not be enough accumulation to complete the evolution process. Therefore, there was no better place than here to use this voodoo potion as a biological weapon. If a higher-level demon lymph was used as a guiding material, Paru could modify it and create a new potion. It could be used on a large scale in the future battlefield. It was very likely that they could defeat the attacking demon army without shedding a drop of blood. Although he had only experimented on the Thanner-Reet demons and did not use the ancient Obilus demons or the immaterial Lamala demons as supplementary materials, the effects of Paru's potion were already very shocking. After all, the demon army of the abyss was mostly made up of countless Thanner-Reet demons. As for the problem of the materials needed to create the potion on a large scale. As for the other materials, the Demolik Snade was in charge of the fortress. Keys could order him to open the Otherworld Gate or communicate with the dimensional merchants and obtain them through trade. He could even use the limited Wish Spell and Wish Spell to solve some of the requirements. These were not a problem. Only the demon lymph could be obtained from the few demon corpses that could be preserved from the battlefield. Therefore, Keys did not intend to use the tactic of adding fuel to the fire. The biological weapon that Paru developed could be used at a specific time to determine the outcome of the battle. The Blue Dragon youth thought for a moment. After making up his mind, he asked, "Paru, what is the name of the troll who taught you voodoo skills?" After hearing Keys' question, the ogre voodoo doctor thought for a moment and shook his head. He seemed a little disappointed. The old troll did not have a name. It was only because he would always make a rumbling sound when cooking ingredients and mixing potions that the children in the tribe would call him Grandpa Rumble. Then this potion shall be called the Rumble Potion. Chapter 76. While Keys and the others were researching how to use the secret weapon, the Purr Potion, to surprise the demon army that was about to surround the fortress, Ogre Brew, who had been entrusted with an important task by the commander of the Bartho mercenary fortress, was busy preparing for other war necessities. More and more injured soldiers began to return to the battlefield medical camp that was very characteristic of the Hell of Bartho, thanks to the unremitting efforts of the wizards and evil priests. Although the elemental prosthetics made by the spellcasters were not that easy to use and would slowly affect the consciousness of the mercenaries from the material plane, these soldiers who did not have the regenerative ability of the demons would be able to pick up their weapons again. This way, the resources of the fortress would not be wasted. The fortress's defense system had revealed some problems when the Firewalker's air attack failed. The fortress had no way to effectively counter attacks from the air. It was too dangerous for the commander, the young Blue Dragon, to lead the elite Batsa Devil as a suicide squad. Who knew what kind of monster was hiding in the demon army? Secondly, It would create a vacuum of high-level combat power. If not for Snade's sneak attack, the Wolf-Snake Devil Warlord could have caused more damage in the fortress. To solve this problem, the ogre blacksmith Nalu, under the guidance of the great goblin engineer Riknaz, used the best materials to create many giant crossbows in the workshop of the fortress. After that, the spellcasters engraved various magical effects on the crossbows, such as gravity arrays and explosion arrays. The grooves were also filled with silver powder. Once the specially made crossbow bolts were fired, these arrangements would take effect the moment they hit the target. The floating beasts that posed a great threat to the fortress's defense system would immediately repeat the tragedy of the Hindenburg if they were hit. Of course, after the war machine known as the Bartho Mercenary Fortress was put into operation, they had made far more preparations. As the saying went, winning a war depends on weapons, and winning a war depends on the soldiers. If the army was a melting pot, then the army on the battlefield was the largest melting pot in the multiverse. Most of the defenders of the fortress were warriors that the devils had recruited from various material planes. These people had different appearances, spoke languages that they could not understand, and had different customs and habits. But in the big furnace that was the fortress, they were growing at an astonishing speed. Not only did slaying the demons hone their combat skills, the bloody battle also urged them to constantly learn new things. For example, when these people were first sent to this camp, only an extremely small number of them could grasp the purgatory language. However, in less than 10 days, most of the surviving mercenaries were able to speak a few sentences in the language of the lower realms. As for understanding simple orders, it was a piece of cake. Perhaps these people had different occupations before coming here. Some were rangers, some were barbarians, and some were rogues. But at this moment, they only had one identity: soldiers. Soldiers who fought with their lives on the line in order to survive this bloody battle. Perhaps due to the influence of the rules of the 9 prisons of Bader, these soldiers spontaneously formed combat teams under the rules of their respective organizations. They cooperated with each other to better resist the invading demons on the battlefield. This choice was not out of loyalty. In fact, the army of the 9 prisons of Bader had never advocated everyone for themselves, and I for everyone. The cooperation between the soldiers was only for themselves, so that they would not be attacked from both sides, and so that they would have a greater chance of survival. Therefore, every soldier carefully made friends with comrades who were beneficial to their survival. The rule of the strong winds was now the accepted standard of this choice. Our broom-browsed Dalton was one of the best. Not only were his former subordinates who had survived several major battles, some of the other soldiers also liked to gather under him and listen to his orders. As for Jason, the former paladin who was now paying debts on the battlefield, he was also well-liked by some soldiers because of his excellent fighting skills and his clean and efficient way of slaying demons. However, unlike Dalton, Johnson had never promised to protect anyone. First, it was because of the maxim of silence. Second, this sinful paladin, who Dalton thought was very similar to Dalton's son, stubbornly believed that he was not worthy of shouldering anyone's expectations. Only by cleansing himself of his mistakes and becoming a paladin again would he be qualified. However, his lack of initiative and irresponsible attitude would occasionally infuriate some of the soldiers who were already difficult to deal with. You really don't know what's good for you. I only recommended you to join Ferguson's team because I thought highly of you. However, before he could finish his sentence, a large palm slapped the back of the ranger's head. This ranger was suspected to be a mix of Darrow dwarven bloodline. Without any resistance, this troublesome soldier fell to the ground in a daze. Sorry, he was too loud and disturbed me, Dalton explained to Jason, who was looking at him. No one objected, not even the other members of Ferguson's team, who came with the paladin. After all, this was Barthol's mercenary fortress from another plane. Dalton was a tough nut to crack. After several battles, he had established his authority in this fortress. Not to mention, he also had to deal with his subordinates who were waiting for orders. No one would stand up for a paladin who looked like a half-baked paladin. As if he hadn't had enough, Dalton bent down and picked up the paladin's weapon. It was a heavy lacquered longbow made of purple wood and 5 feet long when it wasn't strung. Pulling it could shoot an arrow at least 200 paces away. At close range, it could easily pierce through armor. The arm of the longbow was very smooth, indicating that it had been used for many years. The body of the longbow was evenly coated with heavy lacquer, making it very suitable for maintaining its elasticity in the wet rainforest. Overall, it was well maintained and could be considered a valuable item. Although Broom Eyebrows wasn't an expert in archery, he was still a veteran in his own right. He gently pulled the longbow a few times. He was afraid that he would damage the weapon if he pulled too hard. Satisfied, he threw the longbow to one of his subordinates who also used archery. This bow is okay. We need to find a good home for it. Besides, it's not convenient for such a short guy to use such a long bow. Ha. As Dalton spoke, he mockingly gestured at the paladin's height. His subordinates and the surrounding soldiers burst into laughter. Jason glanced at Dalton and didn't say anything. He quietly got up and grabbed the paladin who was lying on the ground. Then, he put the paladin on his shoulder and walked out of the crowd. Judging from the direction he was heading, he should be heading for the field medical camp. Boss, that kid doesn't know what's good for him, one of Dalton's subordinates whispered beside him. Dalton turned around and gave him a fierce glare. He looked at Jason's back and sighed slightly. He's just like that paladin kid, Dalton cursed inwardly. Chapter 77. The worst snake demon warlord died here. A spellcaster wearing a starry robe, made of mithril, stood at the edge of forest far away from the Bardo-Planar fortress. He didn't even turn his head as he asked one of the first-generation cataclysm bugs standing behind him as an attendant. The spellcaster was standing on the boundary between the Avernus soil and the acid fog canyon, which had been teleported here together with the Bardo-Planar fortress. The soil in front of him emitted an exceptionally rich aura of the Nine Hells natural order. This powerful spell caster born in the abyss felt a sense of disgust from the bottom of his heart. Helmet, the dragon's subbody, didn't sneak in alone like he did against the tyrannical god Legion not long ago. He didn't directly find the commander of the Bardo-Planar fortress and destroy it. He asked the attendant of the cataclysm bugs, which he rarely did, in hopes of getting some advice. However, communicating with a creature that was born with schizophrenia meant that he wouldn't get a satisfactory answer. Lord Deputy, it's not just the worst snake demon warlord. The giant skull advisor Langer also died here. How could Langer die so easily? That's right. I heard that he cast a cloning spell on himself. Maybe he's already resurrected. That's right. Maybe the worst snake demon also died and escaped. Those who refuse to accept a tyrant's descendant aren't reliable. Even in front of the terrifying dragon's subbody, the cataclysm bugs couldn't change their habit of talking. However, Helmet didn't feel any anger. Perhaps he just wanted to find someone to chat with to relieve the boredom of waiting. What he had been waiting for had only arrived after he had listened to the Scourge Swarm's endless conspiracy for a while. A few strange pink-skinned acid fogworms crawled out of the ground around Helmet. The communication worms had already arrived. Unlike the previous cataclysm bugs that had been turned into living specimens, Helmet could directly analyze the answer he wanted to hear from the high-frequency chirps of these little guys. That drow lich has indeed betrayed the tyrant worm. The lycanthropy is dead, and its symbiotic axe has yet to be reshaped. The Colossus seems to have a clone, but it's not in the acid fog canyon. Based on that, the nearest demonic army would be able to wipe out the Bator expeditionary army that appeared out of nowhere. Helmet cast a spell to replenish the few communication worms' stamina to travel through the ground at high speed. At the same time, he ordered more demons to come. Helmet of the Bardo-Planar fortress army left the place. Helmet, the cataclysm bug subbody body. Of Helmet's head suddenly turned his head. And Helmet SSS subbody turned of, who was standing of Helmet. Of Helmet of Ditto. I think it's better if we don't. Before this insect could finish its objection, it was immediately devoured by the other acid mist worms that made up the body of the calamity worms. Well, it's good that you don't have any objections. Hemtar nodded affirmatively and pointed at the scourge bugs with his right hand. Driven by the sudden effect of the force field, the first-generation calamity bug swarm flew towards the sky of the acid fog canyon, which was always illuminated by the volcano's radiance. It was as if a rocket had been installed in it. One of Hemtar's hands was in a casting motion, constantly adjusting the trajectory of the rocket swarm of calamity bugs, while the other hand was casting another spell, doing two things at once without causing any problems. When he felt that it was about time, he raised both of his hands at the same time. At the same time, he chanted the incantation to cast the spell. Maximum spell, Note 1. Meteor Burst. 4 meteorites created out of thin air by spells suddenly took shape in the air above the acid fog canyon plain. These meteorite-like creations carried the calamity bugs that were forced into the air and fell straight towards the mercenary fortress of the Bartho Plain. A good show is about to begin, the dragon's subbody muttered to himself after finishing his work. There was no sign of exhaustion on his body, which was usually seen on high-level spellcasters after casting a top-level evocation spell. However, he did not continue to cast other spells. At this time, Hemtar only wanted to quietly watch the show directed by himself. Under the effect of maximum spell, the high-temperature meteorites that fell from the sky were all more than 5 meters in diameter. Moreover, under the deliberate control of the dragon's subbody, they were in a condensed form, which made the fall even more shocking. As soon as this spell was formed, the Demolic Snade and Quest keenly sensed the magic waves of this top-notch evoking spell. The other spellcasters in the mercenary fortress of the Bartho Plain also noticed the meteorites. With such a powerful spell effect and such a large meteorite appearing above their heads, even the warriors who did not know any spells could feel the urgency of the situation. Naturally, they would not sit still and wait for death. How many times can we fight in life? If we don't fight now, when will we? Anti-magic ray, dissociation, Big B's grappling palm. All kinds of counterspells were cast out by the spellcasters as if they were free. However, the strategic spells that were released by the clone of the Lord of Abyss above the legendary level were certainly not easy to deal with. Not to mention, there was also a first-generation disaster bug swarm inside the meteor. This extra, who had been carefully selected by the great director Helmut to act in the big movie directed and acted by himself, was very dedicated. He did not forget his duty even when he was stuffed in the gap between the meteorites. Many acid mist worms gushed out of his body and directly used his flesh to resist the single-target spells cast to stop the meteorites from falling to the ground. Therefore, except for some area of effect counterspells, all other interference with the meteorites were useless. One could imagine what it would be like when a meteor with a single diameter of 5 meters and a combined diameter of more than 10 meters, with some magma on its surface due to the friction with the air, smashed straight into the top of the head. Panic quickly filled the hearts of the defenders in Bator Fortress like bean sprouts that had been soaked in water. Fortunately, when the panic in the defenders intensified and began to develop into despair, they were pleasantly surprised to see 2 dark iron fists suddenly appear out of thin air. Skywrath Fist. Some spellcasters who were knowledgeable recognized this spell, and an emotion called hope began to emerge in the hearts of the defenders. Although the 2 tightly clenched fists were not as powerful as the meteors of the meteor burst, the deep color and sturdy appearance of the fists made it easy for people to see that they contained a huge amount of power. Of course, in the face of the terrifying kinetic energy of the meteorites transformed from potential energy, even such a pair of giant fists did not dare to directly face them. The Skywrath Fist could only find the right time to continuously bombard the meteorites from the side. It would be best if it could directly detonate the spell and make it disintegrate in the air. If not, at least it could change the direction of the meteorites. The one who controlled this spell was Keys, the commander of Bartho Plain. However, he also used the strange item borrowed from Snyder to activate this spell. It had to be said that the young Blue Dragon's decision to hire this Demolic instead of kill him was very wise. This legendary spellcaster had been obsessed with studying escape spells for the past few hundred years and had no interest in collecting otherworldly possessions. However, after thousands of years of accumulation, even an ordinary megalosaurus could not compare to him. He could be said to be very rich. Since he had lost his physical body, he could only temporarily reside in the body of this living creature bodyguard, the terrifying armor. Snyder's previous collection, a pair of strange item gloves engraved with the enhanced version of Skywrath Fist, could only be used by Keys. The young blue dragon wore the gloves in the battle command room of Bartho Plain and punched the air again and again. Even mechanical puppet number 21, who always liked to make weird jokes, looked at Keys nervously. No one laughed at his exaggerated actions. After all, judging from the trajectory of the meteorites, the target of the bombardment was where everyone was, the battle command room of Bartho Plain. Fortunately, the countermeasure worked. Even with the Scourge Swarm's obstruction, the continuous bombardment of Iron Fist did not cause the meteor to explode, but it still managed to deviate the falling meteor, causing it to brush past the edge of the wall and crash into the ground outside the fortress. Note 1. In the game, there's a saying of rolling dice. Probability is used to fit the influence of objective factors in reality. Maximum Spell, a supreme magic skill, refers to the maximum value of the damage and range of the release spell. This article refers to this setting. Chapter 78. Even though the fortress had escaped the calamity, the prismatic wall outside the fortress was damaged to a certain extent, even though it was only swept by the meteor burst tail. The aftershock of the explosion even tore the wall apart and expanded through the gap, creating a huge hole in the impregnable defense system. The meteor burst, which had changed its direction due to Key's heavenly wrath punch, plowed a trench on the ground of the acid fog canyon, fully demonstrating the terrifying power of the spell. Looking at the trench that extended from the fortress to the front, the dragon's subbody, standing at the edge of the fungus forest, shrugged and said helplessly, "It seems that someone doesn't want us to show up. But with just you guys, we can't stop the attack of the Demon Lord," Snade hurriedly said after Keys took off the strange item glove that had activated the heavenly wrath punch. Although he had become an undead creature, he should not have any emotions such as fear. However, the blue hellfire in the eye sockets of Snade's skull burned brighter. He continued to emphasize, "No one is more familiar with the fluctuation of the spell than I am. That is the characteristic of the spell cast by the Tyrant Worm's new incarnation, the dragon's subbody, Helmuter. As long as this incarnation appears, the Tyrant Worm will lurk beside it, waiting for an opportunity to attack. At that time, the group of powerful spellcasters, personal trainers who were treated as distinguished guests by the Tyrant Worm, were attacked and killed in this way." However, Demolik did not say this out loud. Of course, Keys knew that his new employee was terrified at this moment, and so was he. What was a Demon Lord? They were the most powerful demons standing at the top of the food chain in the Abyss. These unique demons could command the entire Abyss level that they ruled. Even the weakest among them was comparable to the strength of a god. What was the incarnation of a Demon Lord? The incarnation of a Demon Lord was the physical manifestation of a part of the Demon Lord's life force. It was created as an agent to allow the Demon Lord to safely hide behind the scenes and plot his evil schemes. However, this was only the relationship between the Demon Lord and its incarnation in most cases. The Tyrant Worm in the Acid Fog Canyon dimension and its dragon subbody were inseparable. The incarnation that this guy created was actually growing in its own giant mouth. The other Demon Lords had various guesses. Some thought that this terrifying worm was too greedy. It wasn't even willing to share its power with its avatar. Some believed that this was because the Tyrant Worm's intelligence was still too low. It was unable to plan long-term plans to establish demon orders in other material planes like other Demon Lords. There were also some who believed that it was a kind of trapping nature, just like the anglerfish that lived in the deep sea. After all, Everyone knew that this demon lord known as the Tyrant Worm was actually an experimental creation of the previous lord of the acid fog canyon plane. Perhaps he had mixed in the characteristics of other creatures when he was created. All kinds of things were discussed differently. Keyes was naturally unaware of the above conjectures. He was neither a big shot with extensive connections in the bottomless abyss, nor was he a reader favored by the Fate Weaver. Of course, even if he knew this, it would not help him improve his current situation. The demon lord's incarnation, Helmuter, and the Tyrant Worm must be lurking nearby. They were eyeing the mercenary fortress of Bartho that he was stationed in. We have nowhere to retreat. We have no other choice. This was the final answer given by the young blue dragon. As for Keyes himself, he clearly remembered what happened the moment he was airdropped to this plane. The Bats-a-Devil did not give him any chance to go back on his word. They must have prepared a backup plan for the situation where the commander fled at the last minute. At that time, the best situation would be to hide in every corner of the multiverse and avoid the pursuit of the demon assassins. The others in the fortress would not have a chance. They could only fight to the end and find a way out in the midst of death. Most of the mercenaries from other planes that were arranged by the Bats-a-Devil's higher-ups had signed the contract. Breaking the contract in the demon's contract would result in death. Even if they did not sign the contract, the current objective conditions were enough to make the choice of escape directly linked to quick death. Unless the spellcasters had abilities comparable to the Demolic Snader, the idea of secretly opening the gate to another world under the eyes of the Demon Lord of the Abyss and the Bats-a-Devil Gendarmerie was simply deceiving themselves. If the soldiers chose to abandon the defensive position and walk out of the fortress at this time, it was no different from seeking death. Even if they avoided the patrolling Batsu Gendarmerie, the demon army that had begun to gather outside the fortress could make them start anew, just be reincarnated earlier. Enemy attack. Be careful. The demons are starting to attack the fortress. Little bastards, come out. The demon army that gathered outside the fortress was far larger than before. Those who had a little prestige and power among the defenders knew that it was time to fight for their lives. They spontaneously organized and integrated their forces. It was worth mentioning that this action really sped up the gathering of the demons in Bartho Fortress. The defenders put on their pig-nose gas masks, picked up their weapons and protective gear, and quickly rushed to the positions they were in charge of. Helmet, who was standing on the edge of the fungus forest like an old monk in meditation, opened his slightly closed eyes. This great director, who had previously failed at the box office, made a comeback and began to prepare for his next work. He had the resources of an entire level of the Abyss at his disposal, so he naturally had the courage to bring money into the cast. And after summing up the experience of previous failures, the director even decided to put down his pride and personally perform his acting skills. After all, counting on the demons to be good protagonists was no different from believing that if there is a similarity, then is purely a coincidence. It was different from this great director who had regrouped and was in a flourishing mood. The defenders of Bartho Fortress, who were designated as supporting characters or background by him, at this time, saw that the scale of this demon attack was far larger than before, but they were not in the mood to be happy at all. Even if they had defeated their opponents several times, and the continuous fierce battles had sharpened the nerves of this group of mercenaries from another dimension, they were still inevitably tired. At this time, these people, half of them were holding their weapons out of obedience to the rules, and the other half were holding their weapons out of the desire to survive in the midst of death. Keyes had already expected this. Previously, when he took the lead to kill the troll and the firewalker, part of the plan was to motivate the soldiers under his command. But now that he knew that there might be a demon lord lurking among the enemy, the young blue dragon had no intention of foolishly rushing up to kill himself. The young blue dragon chose another method from the books on Earth to motivate the soldiers. He remembered that in the book The Emperor's Bayonet, there was a technique on how to use artillery tactics by bombarding the enemy directly to make the enemy lose their courage, and at the same time, motivate the soldiers on one side. Although it was not to the extent of being able to recite it backwards, Keyes still remembered most of the content in the book with the help of his retrieval memory that he had developed as a programmer. The bastion design that was specially followed in the construction of the fortress's defense system played an important role at this time. The protruding city walls allowed the gunpowder weapons, which Keyes referred to as cannons, and the bats it touted as Hellscream, to form a crossfire boundary. Under the command of the commander, the silver-plated cannonballs, which were mixed with some silver shavings that could form a large cloud of silver mist, were hurled at the demon army without sparing any effort. Seeing the group of Tana-Reet demons that had just gathered and mindlessly charged at the fortress being killed like chives being cut, this group of mercenaries from another dimension who had no self-restraint rang out loud cheers and roars of excitement. He reached out his palm and touched the silver mist that rose in front of his eyes due to the cannonballs exploding and dispersing when they hit his body. The slight pain on his fingertips, accompanied by the painful wails of the surrounding demons, made Hemtar, the demon lord's dragon subbody, deeply intoxicated. He gradually indulged in this beautiful picture that played out because of him, with war and death as the main melody. Everything has just begun. Chapter 79. This is just the beginning. Keyes frowned as he stood on the city walls, staring at the demon army that was unable to advance due to the bombardment. He didn't need to spend much effort to come up with such a conclusion. Even using his brain to think was redundant. The demon army showed no signs of collapsing. It was as if every one of them had turned into believers of the god of valor. Even though they were heavily injured by the silver bullets, they continued to charge forward. Blue floated to the platform in front of the fort's command center in his gaseous form. He had just finished dealing with the mission Keyes had given him and had returned to report. Everything is in place. We're just waiting for your orders. Keyes nodded. He knew that he had to find traces of the demon lord and his avatar as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be a waste of ammunition no matter how many towers he slaughtered. Moreover, he estimated that the special ammunition he had prepared would be used up after a few rounds of bombardment. The cannons would have to stop firing as well, or they would be in danger of exploding. As expected, after another 3 rounds of bombardment, the cannons manned by barbed cannoneers began to misfire. Most of the Nayli demons in the higher towers, including the dozen or so Skyburn walkers left on this floor, noticed this as well. While they ordered their subordinates to send themselves to their deaths, a few of them couldn't wait any longer and charged into the fray. They quickly passed through the vacuum created by the cannons. The battle between the defenders of the fort and the demons was like a bolt from the blue. Fortunately, the morale of the defenders had been boosted, and they didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in the first clash with the demons. Due to their nature, only a few demons noticed the loophole in the fort's defenses caused by the meteors and launched a surprise attack on it. Even though the fortress was in a precarious situation, the mercenaries defending the fortress were mostly violent and belligerent. After their morale had been boosted, they had gotten used to the battlefield where flesh and blood flew everywhere like a meat grinder. Of the 3 ogre brothers, Neru, who was the largest of them all, was fighting the most ferociously. This ogre, who was far larger than his peers, waved his newly modified ebony flail and blocked the gap in the fortress defenses. Any demon that wanted to take advantage of this opportunity would be met with a head-on attack. Unlike the man-eating monster, Mechanical Puppet number 21, who was helping to hold the line, used an extremely efficient killing method to prove the axiom that in the world of martial arts, only sturdiness could not be overcome, and only speed could not be overcome. His refined gold fists were like agile snakes, often taking the life of an evil demon with a single strike. In addition to the duo responsible for nailing down this defensive loophole, the other defenders were also engaged in a fierce battle. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of arrows tearing through the air was incessant. The Broom brothers, who had been rewarded by Boss Dalton with a purple shirt of fine craftsmanship, had indeed lived up to expectations. They had displayed the greatest power of this fine weapon. Previously, he had deliberately bribed a spellcaster with a small barrel of ale that was jokingly called the warrior's best friend by the defenders. Therefore, his eyes were currently blessed with eagle eye. This undoubtedly improved his already excellent shooting accuracy once again, allowing him to almost reach the terrifying realm of never missing a target. Well done, Barton boy. After an arrow pierced directly into the ear of a Virum that was emitting rotten spores from a tricky angle, Dalton finally found a chance to send the enemy off. I've already said that this bow is more suitable in your hands. Be careful. Dalton's praise suddenly turned into a warning. A Babu demon assassin stealthily approaching did not even have the time to launch a backstab before it was seen through by the master of the Shadow Thief, who had hidden himself very well. He then shouted a warning to the archer. But as the old saying goes, 100 words are not as good as a silence. It was a broad-bladed dagger that stabbed in from the side that really saved the archer's life. Jensen, who had paid for his crime, used his weapon's gauntlet to firmly entangle the Babu demon's thorn, and used a shield to directly smash the Tana re-assassin's skull. The former paladin, who was dressed no different from an ordinary sword and shield wielder, slightly raised his sword and shield and signaled to Dalton. The latter immediately understood what he wanted to say. This idiot boy has some brains. He didn't waste the silver. I spent a lot of money to get for him. The corner of Dalton's mouth rose, revealing an almost imperceptible chuckle that even he himself did not notice. After several battles, silver had become an important strategic resource. Naturally, there was an anti-corruption team formed by the Batsa demon within the fortress to monitor the use of silver ingots. However, Keyes' silver bullet offensive had used a lot of silver, although most of it was corroded while killing the Tana demons. There were still some scattered scraps that would be collected when the battlefield was cleaned up and the demons' remains were collected. All the defenders had seen the lethality of silver against the demons, so these scraps had become a hot commodity in the black market that mercenaries from other planes had spontaneously formed. Those who were more particular would spend money to hire a spellcaster to help them wash the surface of their equipment with acid before letting the spellcaster plate the leftover silver on it. Those who were more casual would directly go to the forge in the fortress, melt the leftover silver, and pour it directly on their weapons before borrowing a hammer to hammer it. That was all there was to it. They only needed to invest in a small piece of these scraps to ensure their safety when slaughtering demons. That was why any mercenary from another plane who had some worldly possessions would fork out money to buy these things. Dalton had always been generous with his investment in life-saving equipment, and this time was no exception. After using some of the silver plating materials he bought for himself, he found a time when no one was looking to throw the rest to Jensen, who looked like a pauper at first glance. Glancing at the sparkling silver light on the sword and shield of this second-rate kid, Dalton understood that the salutation was to express his gratitude. Looking at the former sacred samurai, making a prayer gesture, and once again rushing into the depths of the demon army, Dalton sighed softly. Damn it! Due to their alignment, the sacred samurai's attack could cause tons of damage to the chaotic and evil nature of the Tana demons. This was also where Jensen's confidence came from. As long as his faith was still there, the lethality of the divine energy he summoned would not diminish. The physical problem that limited his continuous summoning of divine energy was not a big problem for the former sacred samurai, who had been well rested at this time when the battle had just begun. At least when the demons who were fighting separately and pushing each other began to gather to attack him, Jensen was still able to hold his weapon and armor steadily, and through his inner call, attached the divine energy to his shield. He threw the armor that contained divine energy with all his might, and it quickly bounced and hit the gathered demons in a semicircle. Shield bash, evil slashing slash. Chapter 80. In a confrontation between two armies, a true expert would not fly up and down as some people imagined. There was also no so-called fighting aura that would emit a BV sound. The strict training he had undergone to become a paladin had given him a strong physique and solid martial arts. Even in a bloody battlefield where demons were dancing wildly, this powerful warrior was still so dazzling. Although there was no exaggeration like the special effects, His simple movements of slaughtering demons made people feel that this was the epitome of violence. A broad short sword tempered with silver fragments and an iron shield embedded with silver shavings, in the hands of this efficient demon terminator, turned something rotten into something magical. A human with such simple weapons could actually face a horde of Thanner-Reed demons without being at a disadvantage. This was truly admirable. What a fierce warrior! The blue dragon youth, who was wielding his adamantine scythe sword, could not help but applaud when he saw this scene. This time, the demon army that came to attack the city was personally mobilized by the Lord. The number and quality of the army exceeded expectations. The mercenaries from another plane had already made some arrangements in the fortress according to the original plan. In order to gain more time to prepare, the commander of the fortress had no choice but to brave the arrows and stones and join the battle. Recently, Keyes had been training for a while every day according to the 9-sword catalog that he had bought from the merchant Yugoloth. This was the perfect time for him to test the results of his training. The Blue Dragon youth used the army sword technique that was suitable for fighting. His stance was stable, his steps were agile, and he could clearly see the complicated situation around him. Slashing and stabbing were the most common forms of attack in this technique. The way to block was also to use the principle of the weapon to block the enemy's attack. However, as the saying went, a strong man can defeat 10 skilled men. Even if Keyes transformed into a human, he was still a human megalosaurus. The moves he used were all powerful and heavy. With the combination of the strong and sharp adamantine weapon, there were very few demons who could be his match. The Blue Dragon boy had praised Jensen before, and the latter had also noticed him. At first, Jensen was a little surprised that this young man dared to charge into the depths of the demon army just like him. But after seeing his powerful moves, this former paladin could not help but think helplessly in his heart, he's still lacking. Although he's strong, his moves are always old. It'll be dangerous if his physical strength can't keep up. I hope I still have the strength to take care of him when that happens. He did not recognize that the young man was the highest authority in the Bartholomew fortress. Although Keyes had been on the battlefield personally, he was either in his megalosaurus form or too far away from the ordinary defenders. Jensen naturally did not recognize Keyes' appearance. However, he was a former Saint Samurai after all, so he naturally had a good heart. In the midst of the fight, Jensen was constantly adjusting his position to get closer to Keyes. He planned to take this young man with him when he retreated later. The martial arts of the army sword would improve the user's insight. As a megalosaurus, Keyes had a racial advantage in this aspect. Naturally, he would strengthen it now. He only glanced at Jensen's movement from the corner of his eye and guessed what he was thinking. What a rare guy in the lower realm. I didn't expect to fight side by side with a paladin again. Keyes thought of a good friend who liked to play the role of a paladin on Earth. He could not help but sigh. Because of the far-fetched but very reasonable relationship, the Blue Dragon boy took out a small silver bottle from his pocket and found the right time to throw it to Jensen. It's for you. Since the others probably can't use it anyway, it'll be easier to smear it on your weapon and kill the demons later. Keyes threw out the small silver bottle, which contained a few drops of the leftover Honda holy oil. Due to the problem of alignment, this holy oil from the angel race in the Bartholomew Fortress was rarely used in the Bartholomew Fortress. Only senior mages like Keyes and Snade could cast the alignment adaptation spell on themselves and not be hurt by the backlash. Jason, on the other hand, did not have such a problem at all. Although this former paladin was stripped of his title as a paragon and thrown into the bloody battlefield to repay his debt, he had never deviated from the good side of order, and the god he believed in did not abandon him. With his quick reflexes and strong martial arts skills, Jensen still had the strength to take the gift from Keyes while fighting the demons. He gently knocked the blade of the broad-bladed dagger and pushed it away, while his other forearm, which was covered with a shield, held the small silver bottle in the palm of his hand. This smooth movement made Keyes applaud once again. The young Blue Dragon boy said loudly, "Why don't you hurry up and try it? There are many demons here waiting for us to kill." After saying this, Keyes took out the same small silver bottle and crushed it without hesitation, gently smearing the oily liquid inside on his weapon. As if a spark had been thrown into hot oil, the side sword in his hand instantly ignited with a dazzling flame, burning away the stains of the evil demon's blood that had been left on it from killing the evil demons. Seeing this scene, the former Saint Samurai did not suspect anything and turned his weapon into a torch in the same way. However, when he held it in his hand, he clearly felt that although the flame was amazing, it did not burn his hands at all. On the contrary, as the flame burned, a very comfortable warmth flowed from his palms to his limbs and bones. This is the feeling of positive energy. The familiar warmth made Jensen, who was now wandering in the bottomless abyss, feel very surprised. The tiredness caused by the continuous battles was swept away in the blink of an eye. Due to the restriction of the maxim of silence, he could not personally thank the young man who gave him this valuable item, but he was ready to express his gratitude with practical actions. With this essential oil rich in positive energy, my combat power has increased a lot. When we retreat, we must take this generous brother with us. This was just one of the small episodes that appeared from time to time on the battlefield. In fact, the Tana Ri who came to attack the fortress seemed to have gone crazy under the mobilization of the Demon Lord. Even when the cannons on the walls of the fortress were fired again, the soldiers still refused to retreat, even after leaving behind tens of thousands of corpses. They were determined to erase Fort Bador from the plain of Acid Fog Canyon. At this time, the battlefield slowly turned into a huge meat grinder. Although the defenders of Bador Fortress were rotating blades at this time, the Tana Ri demons were minced meat. But once the physical strength of the defenders began to decline, the situation would inevitably be reversed. Mortals could not compete with the demons of the lower realm in endurance. At that time, the scene would become a one-sided massacre. Moreover, so far, the incarnation of the Demon Lord and the tyrant worm hiding beside him had not appeared in the army. The danger that could not be seen was 100 times more dangerous than the danger that could be seen. These two hidden in the sea formed by the Tana Ri demon army was always a huge hidden danger. After cutting down another demon that wanted to attack him from behind, Keyes realized that he had to make a decision immediately. The arrangement in the fortress had reached the final stage. Success or failure depended on this one move. He had to fight for this time no matter what. Retreat. Contrary to the previous paladin's expectations, the young man in front of him, who was fighting fiercely, just now took the initiative to retreat to the main camp. Jason had observed his moves. He should still have a lot of strength left. However, it seemed that because Keyes had been in the position of commander for a long time, his words naturally had a convincing aura. Although Jason had doubts, he still resolutely carried out the young man's order. Retreat was not a route. If he wanted to retreat, he had to deal with the enemy chasing after him. Originally, Jason wanted to bring up the rear himself and buy some time for the young man to retreat, but this strange young man wanted him to personally carry out this challenging task. The style of his scythe in his hand changed in an instant. It changed from the simple and unadorned king's sword to a wild slash like a storm. Although this would give the demons a chance to sneak attack, given the powerful strength of the blue dragon young man, no demons could get close to him for a while. Seeing such a scene, Jason no longer pretended to be pretentious. He gave the young man a be careful look and then took a deep breath. This deep breath obviously used a lot of strength. The pig's nose gas mask on his face, made of metal and leather, was slightly deformed. Shield bash, virtuous evil destroyer. Jason made one last assist for Keyes before retreating. Just like the introduction, this once excellent paladin not only had a strong physique gained through training, but his firm belief also gave him the ability to use spells like Evil Slaying Slash. Not only that, but Jason could also use a skill that was often mastered by senior paladins who were much older than him. By calling on the holy power of virtuousness and attaching it to his weapon, his next attack would cause tons of damage to evil creatures. He threw this silver-inlaid shield that was filled with holy power like a frisbee into the group of demons that were entangled with Kith. Unlike before, The shield did not bounce back in an arc this time. Instead, the double amount of holy power caused the shield to explode. Jason's move was like throwing a high-explosive grenade in the middle of the enemies surrounding Keyes. The broken shield and the surging holy light directly cleared a small group of Tana-wreathed demons. When the deed was done, he would leave without leaving a trace. After finishing this move, the former paladin, who had the demeanor of an ancient hero, rushed straight in the opposite direction without looking back. Because they were deep in the enemy's formation, even the way back to their own formation was not easy. There were many Tana-wreathed demons in front of them. The only advantage was that most of these demons blocking the way had their backs to them. Many mercenaries from other planes were either forced or spontaneously rushed into the enemy's formation in the fierce battle. The Tana-wreathed demons blocking Jason's retreat were facing them at this time, so they could only leave their backs to the former paladin. Although the paladin advocated fairness and courage, he was not so pedantic as to talk about virtue with these Tana-wreathed demons. In fact, without the protection of the shield, he did not want to confront the demons head-on. Holding a broad-short sword smeared with Honda holy oil, Jason deliberately chose to attack the Tana-wreathed demons who were fighting with other mercenaries from other planes of Bador with their backs to him. While the former paladin slaughtered the demons to open up a path of retreat, he also gathered a number of fortress defenders to help him break out. Under his leadership, this group of people tore apart the vanguard of the Tana-wreathed demons like a sharp knife, cutting through cloth. Chapter 81. Jason did not forget about Keyes when he led everyone to charge in the opposite direction. After he realized that he had opened up a path of retreat, he even looked back to see if Keyes had followed them. After Jason's evil-slaying chop grenade assisted, Keyes also took out his high-tech weapon, the wailing double-barreled shotgun. Since entering the lower plane, Keyes had not used this weapon much. Although it was not to the extent of being a treasure, how could he improve his skills if he did not practice controlling the gun? People could not always rely on cheats to survive. They had to have real skills. Anyway, with the density of the demons in front of him, there was no danger of missing the target. This was the perfect opportunity to remove his title of body tracing master. The young blue dragon, who had always been full of action, stood slightly on his feet and made a pose commonly used in Western cowboy gladiators. He held the shotgun with one hand and did not need to aim carefully. He just pulled the trigger at the Tana-wreathed demons that rushed towards him. Bang! The shotgun that had been loaded before the battle sprayed out in a fan shape from the muzzle, covering a large number of Dretch that rushed towards him. The silver-plated bullets tore through the bodies of the weak demons, and for a moment, screams could be heard everywhere. This also confirmed the name of Keyes' weapon. The double-barreled shotgun could fire twice in a row. The demons that were hit by the bullets in the second wave were relatively more miserable. A lurking Babu demon rogue was discovered by Keyes and was shot in the chest. The kinetic energy of the silver-plated bullets was completely released in the flesh of the demon. A huge hole appeared from the front of the demon's chest to the back, and its body also bounced high and fell heavily. Give me a target, and I'll give you back silence. Ignoring the fact that he was just shooting at the demon's face, the young blue dragon proudly recited this long-time favorite line. Of course, although this operation looked fierce and efficient, it did not scare away the demons who were used to seeing blood and limbs. The Tana-wreathed demons could rarely be called warriors, but once they entered the state of battle, their brain would often ignore the fear of death. In the long life of these creatures, there was no lack of experience in responding to the summons and being fortunate enough to wreak havoc in the material plane. Although most of them ended up being killed by heroes, the demons could soon be reborn in the blood pool in the bottomless abyss. That undoubtedly deepened the contempt these creatures had for death. Even if they were now in the abyss, where demons would truly die if they died here, these fellows still attacked the blue dragon youth without fear of death. In desperation, Keyes had to set foot on the path opened by Jason and followed their footsteps and slowly retreated in the direction of the fortress. He figured out how to lure the tyrant worm and its avatar out, but in the encirclement of the demon army, it was still too risky. It was better to be safe than sorry. It was better to use it in a safer stronghold. As time passed, the Tana Reed demons had more stamina than mortals, and their numbers were many times greater than the defenders of the fortress. The situation of the battle was gradually developing in the demons' favor. If one looked down at the entire battlefield from the sky, they would see that the mercenaries from other planes and the demon army as a whole were in a crisscrossing pattern. However, the jagged front where the two came into contact was slowly advancing towards Bator Fortress. There were other mercenaries from other planes like Keys and Jason who had charged into the enemy's formation, and they gradually began to retreat in groups. Fortunately, the cannons of the fortress were still firing loudly. The powerful Hellscream shells smashed into the sea of Tana Reed demons one after another, creating large waves of broken limbs and blood. Lord Helmet, whom our main character Keys had been thinking about, was not spared either. The cannons that were bombarding him repeatedly found the avatar of the Demon Lord. Although even fortified bullets wouldn't be able to do anything to a dimensional ruler, it was still quite humiliating for a Demon Lord's incarnation of a dragon to be repeatedly slapped in the face by artillery shells. However, in order to achieve his original intention of directing a good show, the superboss endured the humiliation and slowly advanced step by step. He wanted to wear the shiniest shirt and pretend to be very emotional, and personally walk to Bator Fortress to get on his own four-sided platform. However, any demon who saw him embarrass himself was in trouble. They were either directly hit by a mental retardation spell, or directly taken away by a hand gesture that caused the parasitic acid worms in their bodies to go berserk. Along the way, there were many more victims of the Tana, Reed demons, and newborns of the cataclysmic worms. It could be said that a general success was built on thousands of dead bodies. Making a good movie was a waste of effort. Fortunately, hard work paid off. After walking through the artificial isolation zone created by the Hellscream cannons, the great director Helmet walked to the front of the demon army. They were less than a stone's throw away from Bator Fortress, where the mercenaries from other planes relied on the fortress's defensive system to resist the Tana Re-demons. Although Dalton only began to experience a serious military showdown after he went to hell, he still had a lot of experience. But when he was in Soft Maple City, this Broom Eyebrows boss had experienced a lot of gang battles. Even when he was fighting the Tana Re-demons, he did not forget to observe both sides of the battle. This was a kind of wisdom that came from the streets. There must be a turning point in the battle between two sides. At that time, one side was bound to rise while the other side was bound to fall. He had seen it countless times. The minions of the gangs fought without fear of death, but in the blink of an eye, they suddenly turned around and fled for no reason. It was as if someone had installed a timer in their heads. Although the mercenaries from other planes in Bator Fortress had also experienced life and death battles before, the situation this time was completely different from the past. This time, so far, there were no powerful monsters like the Baylor, the Apostles of Calamity, or the wolf-snake demons that made people despair. But it was precisely this difference that gave Dalton a bad premonition. He believed in his own eyes. When the demons attacked the fortress, he had already observed the attack pattern of the demon army. There must be a powerful high-grade demon driving it to force the chaotic Tana Reed demons to carry out a slightly organized operation. Otherwise, those guys would not even be able to walk in a straight line. The scale of the demons attacking this time was far greater than before. This was the first time the demons had approached the outer walls of the fortress. Based on the current situation, Dalton estimated that the outermost defensive position would not be able to resist the seemingly tireless and numerous enemies for too long. And the question came back. Where was the commander behind the demons who could make so many demons launch a continuous attack without fear of death? The answer to his question was an invisible force field giant hand, Bigby's capture palm. As a shadow thief master who hid very well, Dalton's perception was quite sensitive. He only observed a slight distortion in the surrounding light, which allowed him to discover this deadly giant hand. Crouching down and rolling, Broom Eyebrows dodged the capture of the force field giant hand with a standard thief's evasive maneuver. When he dodged and hid behind one of his colleagues with an agility that did not match his body size, he had time to size up the high-level spellcaster who attacked him. That's right, Dalton did not associate Helmet's image with a demon at first glance. This dragon subbody was not conspicuous among the Tana-wreathed demons and was only slightly taller than ordinary people. The mithril silk robe he wore was more in line with the fashion style favored by human mages. At the same time, it revealed a trace of mystery, and, at the same time, it announced to the world that I'm rich. But there was no doubt that the guy standing next to Demon Thanner, Ree, was very powerful. The demons around him moved in all directions, as if they were afraid that they would not be able to avoid him. Coupled with the strange-looking calamity bugs behind him, it had to be said that his aura was astonishing. He actually dodged it. Helmet seemed to be surprised that such a mortal could actually dodge his spell and could not help but think. The incarnation of the Demon Lord was somewhat unhappy. He stretched out his right hand and clenched it tightly. As he moved, the force field giant hand that had not yet dissipated slowly turned into a clenched fist, Bigby's Vajra fist. Aiming at the fish that had escaped the net hiding in the fortress's formation, the force field fist flew out. Dalton hurriedly dodged, but the force field fist formed by the magic energy seemed to be equipped with a precision guide. After hitting a few people and becoming an arrow at the end of its flight, it still hit the body of the shadow thief master fiercely. You're really stubborn. Dalton did not know whether he was talking about the soul-chasing spell or Broom Eyebrows, who was still struggling at death's door after receiving a force field fist that was not inferior to the attack of a battering ram, although it was an arrow at the end of its flight. But one thing was clear. The incarnation of the Demon Lord who cared about face did not intend to let go of his target. Firstly, it was his stubborn personality. Secondly, he did not want Dalton to rely on the experience of escaping from his hands to go around the world and ruin himself. On the other hand, although the Shadow Thief Master was indeed hit by the Bigby's Vajra fist, he was not seriously injured because of his own profession's ability to dodge. Using the reaction force of the Vajra fist, this guy even widened the distance between him and the dangerous dragon subbody. Of course, the incarnation of the Demon Lord was not going to let him go. Not only did he personally chase after him, but he also ordered his own kin to join in the pursuit. Under the command of the dragon subbody, the newborn cataclysm bugs rushed out of the battle line that was gradually straightening. The turning point that Dalton had been waiting for a long time finally appeared. As he wished, he reached a safer place before the weakened side retreated. But he certainly did not expect that the minion who suddenly turned around and fled was actually himself. Of course, Broom Eyebrows' turn around and flee was certainly different from the street gangsters. Generally, street gangsters would not be chased by multiple high-level demons while fleeing for their lives. In the face of the relentless pursuit of the disaster bugs, Dalton wisely chose to retreat with the other defenders instead of just covering his head and fleeing like a rat. An arrow shot from the side behind directly sank into the body of a disaster bug. Dalton's archer brothers tried to kill these high-leveled acid mistworms, but the results were minimal. Even if the purple robe-wooden bow in his hand was of superior quality, it still couldn't give off the feeling of shooting an RPG with a bow as described in some novels. But what he could not do did not mean that others could not do it. A broad-bladed dagger slashed diagonally from the bottom left to the top right, cutting the target in half like a hot knife through butter. The white flames burning on the wound offset the demon's innate regenerative ability. And just like that, it ended the life of the calamity swarm closest to Dalton. As a former sacred samurai who was in the extreme opposite camp, he used a weapon that was not only tempered with silver, but also smeared with Honda holy oil, and used the evil slashing slash to deal with a Thanner re-demon. Chapter 82. Jensen used his own blade to repay the people who had helped him in the past. After calming down the guilt in his heart, his faith was sublimated, which also made his attacks full of holy power sharper. The demons of Tana, Ri, who used to be a paladin, were no match for him. However, it was easy to be punished if one was too strong. Helmeter noticed this foreign mercenary warrior who was on a killing spree. A paladin who worships the good side of order? How could such a guy appear in the barracks of the 9 prisons of Bader? Is it possible that the Batsu Devil's recruitment advertisements have reached all the way to Mountain Paradise? The dragon's avatar could not help but be surprised. As the incarnation of a homebody demon lord who had never walked out of the bottomless abyss, Hemtar was naturally not very knowledgeable. Therefore, he did not understand how much effort the demon Batsu had put in to recruit enough blood mercenaries from other dimensions. Of course, this lack of knowledge did not affect the strength and cunning of this monster. Helmeter was not angry when he saw the paladin wantonly slaughtering the new family members he had just transformed not long ago. Instead, he felt that using such a rare opponent as a trailer for his work was actually a somewhat surprising and wonderful idea. When Jensen swung his sword to cut down another swarm of calamity worms, something unexpected happened. The 2 halves of the demon's body suddenly exploded, and thousands of acidic worms burst out like popcorn out of a pot. In an instant, they swept towards the paladin who was still on a killing spree. "Be careful," Dalton of the Broom's brow gang warned loudly. At the same time, the Shadow Thief Master no longer deliberately hid his strength. His figure suddenly flashed and jumped into the shadow under his feet. This move was much better than the Babu demon assassins in the demon army. When he appeared again, he directly jumped out from Jensen's shadow. Shadow Strike, Skynet Loose Hands. Dalton's fists, which were wearing spiked gloves, turned into a sky full of fist shadows, shrouding the massive amount of worms that were gushing towards him. He had practiced this skill to the point where he could use it with ease. It helped Jason block part of the explosion of the calamity bugs without hurting the former Saint Samurai, who were buried by the acid mistworms. In the face of the sudden explosion, Jensen had indeed fallen into a passive situation. Fortunately, Broom Eyebrow's timely rescue gave the experienced warrior a moment of respite. He quickly adjusted his rhythm. First, he used his Sacred Bruise ability to convert the additional damage caused by the acid worms into bruises that did not affect his movement. Then, he immediately used his holy power to heal the bruises. Even so, it was difficult to avoid physical pain, but at least his combat strength would not decrease too much. "Can you still fight?" Broom Eyebrows asked without looking at Jason. His attention was focused on Helmthal, who was walking towards him. "Don't think too much, kid. I didn't save you on purpose. It's just that this matter is really difficult to deal with. I might need your help to deal with it." After hearing Dalton's words, the former Saint Samurai did not say much. He just shook his arm, which was still a little sore, and then silently walked to the gang leader's side and stood still. The tip of the wide-bladed short sword in his hand was slanted towards the ground. He made a Saint Samurai sword stance that could only be grasped after a lot of practice. The stalemate was broken by 3 long arrows thrown from the sky. Dalton's bow-wielding lackey had some foundation as a ranger. When he retreated, he easily climbed up the outer wall of Bador Fortress. When he saw that his boss and Jensen, who had helped him before, were facing the same enemy, he did not think twice and pulled out arrows to provide long-range support. 3 consecutive arrows were shot towards the enemy in the distance in a triangular formation. However, what was unexpected was that the enemy did not act like a regular spellcaster and use conventional spells such as Protective Arrow to block the long-range sneak attack. As the incarnation of the Demon Lord, although Helmtar was not a melee expert, he was definitely not a weakling. He just grabbed an arrow shaft in the air and gently fiddled with it. The other 2 arrows also deviated and fell to the ground. Then he threw the arrow in his hand forward. This arrow that was thrown casually was surrounded by crackling electric arcs. At first glance, one could tell that it was not easy to deal with. Dalton and Jensen did not intend to take it head-on. But just as they were about to dodge, another spell followed. Command, Intimidate. Readers who have read the previous chapter would surely remember that even the powerful Batsu's fear demons could not completely avoid the influence of this command spell. It was not hard to imagine how bad the situation was for Dalton and Jensen at this time. Shadow meld, shadow meld. At the last moment, Broom Eyebrows was a little more skillful and recovered from the influence of the spell first. Then, this master of shadow thieves instantly used his special skill of shadow meld and used 2 gloves to catch the arrow that Helmtar shot at him. When he reappeared, Dalton had already used shadow meld to appear behind the enemy. Without any hesitation, he stabbed the arrow with crackling electric arcs into the back of the enemy, who seemed to be a high-grade spellcaster. But it was just an illusion. Oh no, we fell into a trap. Dalton immediately reacted, but it was too late. Helmtar's scale-covered claws reached out from his wide sleeves and pierced through Broom Eyebrow's body. Jensen would never forget the scene that unfolded in front of him. This sinister-looking mafia boss had his body pierced through by a demon's sharp claws. His blood mixed with his internal organs turned into brown vomit as it gushed out of his mouth. "Don't worry about me, just go." This was the last thing Jensen read from his mouth. The last thing he did was to muster up his remaining strength and use the spiked gloves to strike the demon's claws that extended from his chest. This action triggered the special effect of the enchanted weapon. Driven by the spell, the 2 fists were like hydraulic presses, smashing the demon lord's palms into a bloody mess. Had Helmtar ever been injured like this before? It was no joke that the 5 fingers were connected to the heart. In an instant, a sharp pain surged into his eyes. Anger rose from his heart, and the evil demon's subbody pierced his other arm into Dalton's back. Under the force of the 2 arms, the underworld boss who once commanded Soft Maple City was torn in half like a rag. "You really deserve to die." This was the first sentence Jensen said after breaking the maxim of silence that he had always adhered to. Chapter 83. Seeing Dalton die tragically in front of him, the former Saint Samurai was not only angry, but also inexplicably sad. The word revenge was deeply imprinted in Jensen's heart like blood in his eyes. In order to get more power, he personally broke the silent proverb that he had been practicing for a long time. This would bring a temporary increase in power, but the price was that Jason, who worshipped the god of justice and law, would violate the agreement of the law and might lose the god's attention forever. But so what? Didn't Jason, the former Saint Samurai, commit the crime of murder because of the morality in his heart and lost the glory of the exemplary path? Even though I have died 9 times, I have never regretted my actions. He had to defend what he believed in with his life, because it was more important than life, more precious than honor, because it was the path in the heart of the Saint Samurai. He had to let the world know that good and evil would be rewarded in the end. As the incarnation of the demon lord, Helmtar did not care about the blood on his hand. He just flicked it gently and then used magic to repair the wound on his palm caused by Dalton's dying blow. After removing the seal of the silent proverb, there was no dazzling light, but Jason's body began to swell and slightly propped up the gray robe on his body. Only by observing carefully could one see the characteristics of the most powerful group of heaven warriors from the weak light rippling out of his body and the changes in his snow-white eyes. Oh, it seems that something extraordinary has happened. Helmtar looked at the Saint Samurai in front of him, who seemed to be angered by his actions and triggered some of the characteristics of the heavenly creatures in his blood. He could not help but be slightly surprised. "Thou shalt be hated by the mysterious." In this world, language itself was a kind of power. When this sentence was said with the holy language of creation that he was not proficient in, the world changed because of it. Although others did not feel anything strange, Helmtar, as the person involved, clearly felt that there seemed to be a kind of shackle composed of karma quietly, but inevitably entangled his fate. "What did you do?" In shock and anger, the dragon's subbody, which was still calm just now, instantly exploded. "Order death." But as soon as the incantation left his mouth, he felt that something was wrong. As a spell master, he was very sure that the spell model he had constructed was accurate, But the moment the spell was activated, the model collapsed instantly, causing the spell's effect to be greatly reduced. Originally, a top-tier enchantment like Order, Death, could only be resisted by a mortal with their total HP. There was no effective way to nullify it. But after being hit by this greatly reduced version of the spell, the paladin in front of him only seemed to frown in pain, and then continued to attack with his sword. How could this not be a huge mistake? The reason for all these variables was because of the language that Johnson had just used. The so-called creation language was actually a fragment of a lost language. Some scholars believed that it was the predecessor of the heavenly realm language. Very few mortals knew one or two of their words. Their power was so great that no mortal mind could understand more than one or two sentences. In this language, there were no evil words such as pain, despair, hatred, and betrayal. The word disgust that Johnson knew was probably one of the most negative words in this language. But Johnson was only a mortal after all. Even if he used the creation language, the curse of the demon lord incarnation being discussed by the mysterious was only partially realized. As the incarnation of the tyrant worm, the dragon's subbody, Helmuter, had the ability of a warlock while being a mage. Although there was a problem with the construction of the spell model, it did not mean that he could not fight back. Compared to mages, warlocks relied more on the power of their bloodline to cast spells. It was similar to the spell-like abilities of the lower realms demons. Although there were not as many types of spells as mages, warlocks of the same level could use more spells than mages. And with the tyrant worm's main body supporting him, Helmuter naturally did not have to worry about the lack of warlock spells. It was just that most of the spells he could use now were evoking spells. Prismatic Spray. The dragon's subbody, who was no longer in the mood to continue fighting, flipped its palm, and a cone-shaped beam of light formed by 7 colors suddenly shot out and enveloped Johnson, who was rushing over with his sword. The effects of this high-level evoking spell were very random. If one was lucky, it would be like being shown by a flashlight. If one was unlucky, the damage would be reduced according to the 7 colors of light. There was no doubt that the former sacred samurai often did good deeds, and good deeds would be rewarded with good deeds. This was a deeply hidden law of order in this world. The lucky Johnson only triggered one disease debuff. After breaking this silent dictum for half an hourglass, the god's blessing effect happened to be able to reduce the damage caused by the disease. Therefore, this vengeful warrior dashed out of the spell's area of effect without suffering any real damage. When the holy power poured into the wide short sword in his hand, the Honda holy oil that was smeared on the blade was completely ignited. The flame made all the good people feel warm and made all the evil people feel terrified. Johnson swung his sword at the demon in front of him with an unstoppable momentum. Under the influence of the flame of vengeance, the blade suddenly became a little tighter. Most of the righteous people were the butchers. Except for Johnson, who was close at hand, Dalton's subordinates did not scatter after seeing their boss's tragic death. All of a sudden, Helmuter became the target of everyone. He had to face the burning sword hanging above his head that constantly challenged his chaotic and evil nature. He also had to be on guard against the sneak attacks of his minions from all directions. In addition, he had no idea how to remove the influence of the holy word of creation on his spellcasting ability. The various encounters that he had encountered had driven the leader of the demons crazy. He even wanted to immediately summon the main body of the tyrant worm that was often in a dormant state to prepare for the apotheosis and break out of the ground to end everything in front of him. Bear with it. After all, the strange megalosaurus at the core of this fortress has not appeared yet. Helmuter tried to use reason to suppress his rage. For any demon, this was indeed a big challenge. But these ants really deserve to die. The furious demon lord directly used his claws to catch Johnson's short sword. The sharp blade cut his palm, and the holy flame on it was slightly weakened due to the contamination of the demon's blood. But just as he was about to smash the weapon into pieces, the holy flame on the sword suddenly soared. Just like what Johnson did when he broke Keyes' weapon, The weapon exploded into pieces that covered Helmuter's entire upper body. Sword attack. Worship kindness and destroy evil. As soon as the short sword was caught, Johnson bent one of his knees and squatted down. At this moment, he just happened to dodge the flying sword fragments. Not only that, he did not stop attacking even though he was barehanded. From bottom to top, Johnson's strength went from his heel to his fist. Using the momentum of the bow, Johnson landed a heavy punch on Helmuter's lower abdomen. Fist of Heaven. P.S. Note 1. Prismatic Spray in D&D is a 7th level evocation type spell, and Colorful Spray is a 1st level illusion type spell. Because of the Chinese translation, it is easy to confuse. Just a simple explanation, it will not affect the reading. Chapter 84. Fist of Heaven was a powerful barehanded attack technique that was triggered by a sacred samurai who had practiced the Fist of Shock and Awe by infusing it with holy energy. Jason, who was once blessed by the gods, persevered for decades under the guidance of the belief of upholding justice and combating evil. At this moment, his ability bloomed magnificently in the bottomless abyss. If the splashing power of Chongshan in the explosion of the broadsword was a great threat, then this close-range attack of the Fist of Heaven was a crisis. Even with the strength of the Demon Lord's incarnation, Hemtar was still sent flying a few feet off the ground by the strange force, and a large part of the tyrant worm's tongue that was connected to his legs was dragged out. Not only that, the Fist of Heaven's holy deterrence directly penetrated his natural resistance, and the dragon's subbody fell into a state of slight sluggishness due to the deterrence. On the battlefield, such a moment of sluggishness was fatal. The spinning hatchet and the arrows shot by the archers hit their targets one after another. Originally, this scene would never have happened under the protection of the magic shield, but the sound of the hatchet tearing the mithril silk robe and the sound of the arrow piercing the flesh was the most realistic reflection of the absurd fact that these mortals had actually hurt the incarnation of a demon lord. Demons never regarded one-on-one combat as a kind of heroism. In fact, they rarely praised this kind of behavior, which was often praised by many other races. What's more, the situation now was a group of people fighting against their own boss. The cataclysmic bugs that were originally scattered not far away from the dragon's subbody swarmed up and attacked Jensen and the other participants in the fight as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Although there were no powerful first-generation bodies like the ones in the army of the tyrannical gods, these newborn cataclysmic worms still brazenly used some of their spell-like abilities or directly went up to fight at close range. Acid fog, poisonous flames, and shrieking acid worms played the prelude to the destruction of the Broom Eyebrows gang. These guys did not have Jason's divine protection ability to protect them. Even if they were super fighters who could take down a dozen double flower red sticks in a street brawl, they were no better than lambs in front of the frenzied Tana-Re demons. It should be noted that the demons of Tana-Re had never been afraid of anyone when it came to ganging up. Even the Batsa Devil, who had a strong overall strength and was known for its strict order, could only fight on par with the ultimate villains of the bottomless abyss in the big data statistics of local battles. Demons had always been the ones ganging up on others. Very few creatures had the ability to gang up on demons. Moreover, this was their own territory. Of course, this was only for the Calamity Bugs. The other Tana-Re demons living in this plane hated these parasites that were everywhere in the Acid Fog Canyon. Protect him. Protect the Emperor. Purge the Emperor's concubines. Yep, in the end, this acid mist worm was quickly devoured by its fellow Calamity worms due to its rather inappropriate behavior. The Calamity Bugs were inexplicably excited. The Calamity Bugs were all over the Calamity Bugs' bodies, and the Calamity Bugs were constantly muttering neurotic words. This was actually a psychological tactic used by the Calamity Bugs. Their opponents had to passively accept the test of focus. If they were not careful and distracted, the Calamity Bugs would easily take advantage of the situation. Perhaps it was a spell-like attack, or perhaps it was a choke bite from the Calamity Bugs. The Calamity Bugs would always use different methods, to reap the lives of their opponents. Therefore, it was very difficult to figure out a pattern when fighting against them. Ordinary warriors could only rely on speed and brute force to deal with the calamity bugs, so that the calamity bugs would not be able to react in time, or even if they did react, they would not be able to resist. Jason had wanted to continue attacking Hemtar, who had fallen into a state of fear, but the calamity bugs that were harassing him forced him to be careful. He also did not want to give up on his allies who were being slaughtered by the calamity bugs. Revenge for one person, or let more people live. If he chose the latter, he must immediately protect these people and retreat. But maybe after he retreated, he would completely lose the favor of the gods and become a slightly stronger ordinary person. Maybe he would die in the abyss. Maybe he would lose the last chance to seek justice for the familiar stranger. Maybe Jason suddenly thought of the words that Dalton, who was torn in half, had mouthed to him before he died. "Don't worry about me. Go." He instantly made up his mind and used all his strength to rush to the strangers who were being attacked by the calamity bugs. After rescuing them, he said to the calamity bugs, "Don't worry about me. Go." Peace of mind was where he belonged. In the past, just now, and now, this Saint Samurai had never betrayed his beliefs. Don't even think about leaving. To the Saint Samurai's slight surprise, Hemtar, who had fallen into a state of fear, actually recovered so quickly. This demon lord's avatar did not care about the torn robe on his body, nor did he care about the arrows and flying axes embedded in his body. As soon as he woke up, he roared loudly in the language of the abyss. However, just like all the villain's declarations in the book, Helmutau only shouted out one sentence, leaving behind a large number of curses that were blocked before they could leave his mouth. "Finally found you, guy. Railgun." As a privilege given by the author to the protagonist, the young blue dragon was always able to shine at the crucial moment. Originally, Keyes had planned to use a strategy to lure this demon lord's avatar out, but on the way back to the fortress, he saw the Saint Samurai Jason fighting a swarm of calamity bugs. There was a 99% chance that someone who could command such a large number of high-level calamity bugs was the target Keyes was looking for. It was really a case of traveling far and wide in search of something, only to find it without any effort. Without thinking too much, the young blue dragon instantly used the fine gold scythe in his hand as a cannonball. Using the instantaneous formation of a super-strong electromagnetic field, he launched it at the most beautiful child, wearing very avant-garde clothes, the dragon's secondary body, Hemtar. The supersonic scythe cannonball fired at such a close distance was impossible to dodge. Moreover, as the target, Hemtar, had just recovered from the Saint Samurai's attack and was still a little dizzy. In this way, the railgun hit this semi-fixed target without any suspense. I knew I was not a master of body sketching. Facing the demon lord's avatar that was blown away by the bombardment, the young blue dragon remembered the teachings. It is better to be courageous than courageous to pursue a desperate enemy. Don't learn from an overlord for the sake of fame. 3 steps in 2. Quest quickly caught up to him. At the same time, he dispelled the spell's mimicry effect while running. The young blue dragon, who was no less than an adult megalosaurus, rose from the ground and leaped into the sky. The shadow of the dragon's wings covered the army of demons. The gaps of its indigo scales reflected the light of the underground volcano and flashed with golden light. Its eyes were like molten gold as it locked onto the target that had just been blown away by the railgun. Its 2 hearts stirred with surging power at the same time. Chapter 85. With the previous experience, the young blue dragon's double breath was quickly formed. The blazing dragon flames and the cone-shaped weakening gas hit Hemtar at the same time, who had just been hit by the railgun. The mithril silk robe on his body, which had been reduced to rags, was completely reduced to ashes. Keyes, who had transplanted the golden dragon's heart, seemed to have inherited the megalosaurus's talent of luck. Coupled with the follow-up effect of the paladin's word of creation, the demon lord's avatar could not withstand the test of the weakening breath. His weakened body did not have any effective defensive means before it was directly hit by the dragon flame. By the time it landed on the ground, it was already charred on the outside and tender on the inside. Kill that megalosaurus. The cataclysmic worms on the ground burst into a loud cry, which was rare for them. When they saw the tragic scene of the dragon avatar being ambushed, they were all furious. Not only did they launch the attack themselves, but they also ordered the rest of the Thanari army to join in the crusade against Keys. The young blue dragon, soaring in the sky, was naturally not afraid of the enemy's counterattack. In the face of a large number of demons, he did not have time to think, nor was he willing to passively defend. After a slight adjustment, Quest used his specialty of using offense as a form of defense. Magnetic release. Keys's mass railgun. The silver-containing, armor-piercing electromagnetic cannonballs tore through the slightly green air of the acid fog canyon with amazing kinetic energy, hitting those who dared to offend the dignity of the megalosaurus head-on. Few demons could ignore such a fierce physical attack. Most of them fell to the ground with serious injuries after taking just one hit from the young blue dragon's railgun. A few unlucky ones were hit in the head and other vital parts and died directly. With just this one hit, a huge vacuum appeared in the vanguard of the demon army. Just as Keys was about to follow up with another attack, he suddenly had an epiphany. The young blue dragon flapped his wings and quickly rose to the skies above the mercenary fortress in Bartho. The mouth of a giant beast broke out of the cracked soil of the acid fog canyon and bit down. The jagged fangs of the giant mouth were even slightly higher than where Keys had been hovering. The heavily injured incarnation of the demon lord no longer fantasized about his exaggerated dream. He brazenly awakened the half-asleep tyrant worm. The repeated humiliation from the mortals had infuriated him. After awakening his body, Hemtar, who was already physically and mentally exhausted, seemed to have been plugged into a power bank to prolong his life. The muscles all over his body swelled up like a balloon, and the original wounds on his body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye under the nourishment of the powerful vitality. The tyrant worm's kiss, which was supposed to bloom in the center of Bartho, appeared in advance outside the fortress defense line. It had to be said that the demon lord's mouth was really extraordinary. It had the same effect of clearing out the battlefield as Keys's railgun, or even better. Everything within a few hundred meters, whether it was the vanguard of the demon army or the defenders of Bartho, was suddenly stuffed into the monster's giant mouth full of fangs. In fact, for a creature like the tyrant worm that was even more astonishing than the titans, it was difficult to rely solely on physical strength to support its overly large body. It could only move freely with the help of magical energy. Megalosaurus, as an excellent magical creature, were naturally very sensitive to magical energy fluctuations. It was because of this that the young blue dragon was able to sense the magical energy fluctuations that the tyrant worm released when it was ready to attack, and thus escape the disaster. Young Megalosaurus. After the tyrant worm was awakened, Hemtar, who was originally an independent personality, would be greatly affected. At this time, he would often indulge in his primal instinct to devour everything. It's crunchy. It must be delicious. As the tyrant worm's tongue stuck out from the gap between its fangs and licked its mouth greedily, the dragon's body that grew on the tip of the tongue quickly spiraled up in the air. Hemtar's clothes had long turned into ashes and were blown away by the wind. At this time, the true appearance of the demon lord, who was originally hidden under the hooded mithril silk robe, could be clearly seen. This guy's body was covered with thick green acidic saliva secreted by the tyrant worm's tongue. Only the limbs that were not covered by the saliva exposed the scales on the surface of the megalosaurus. His head was somewhat similar to that of a kobold, but much larger. At this time, because of the influence of the tyrant worm's consciousness, Hemtar's originally pale and lifeless eyes revealed a terrifying crimson light. Super electromagnetic gun. Bigby crushing palm. One after another, Keys and Hemtar used their best attacks one after another. The electromagnetic accelerator cannonball and the force field giant palm collided heavily. It was like a silver bottle breaking, but a violent scene appeared above Bottor Fortress. Large pieces of cannonball, like bursting water, splashed everywhere. And the one that broke the silver bottle was the force field giant palm that rose from the bottom. After all, it was different with a power bank. Even at this time, Hemtar still could not get rid of the influence of the word of creation that followed him like a shadow. But with the power transfer from his body, he could actually cast a top level 9 evocation spell with a wave of his hand. That's right, compared to the Bigby's Capture Palm and Bigby's Vajra Fist that he had used before, this Bigby's Crushing Palm was the true trump card of this series of force field spells. Its might was naturally incomparable. Even if he could not use supreme magic skills, such as spell maximization, due to the control obstacle, Hemtar's spell still successfully went through Keys's super electromagnetic gun head-on. The force field giant palm that shattered the cannonball continued to attack the young blue dragon hovering in the sky. The demon lord was so terrifying. If he kept a low profile for hundreds of years like those mutant dragons whose names shook the world, Keys might have allowed this spell to hit him. But our protagonist was now just a young blue dragon. He was still a child. Even if he was about the same size as an adult megalosaurus, he did not have the slightest dangerous thought of testing the law. Moscow doesn't believe in tears, and the bottomless abyss doesn't care about age. Keys muttered helplessly, but he still quickly cast a high-level teleportation spell to teleport himself to a safe place to avoid the attack of the force field giant palm. Then, he continued to think of ways to deal with Hemtar. The young blue dragon did not have the intention to fight with the demon lord's incarnation. He was just waiting for a signal. But Hemtar, who was fighting with him, had turned into a dogskin plaster under the subconscious effect of the tyrant worm's dragon-eating habit. Fortunately, although the spells used were extremely dangerous, most of them did not cause great damage to Keys's dragon body. The tyrant worm had a preference for devouring a complete megalosaurus. Except for the Bigby's Crushing Palm at the beginning, he rarely used powerful evocation spells. Instead, he used a lot of enchantment spells that leaned towards control. Under the influence of the word of creation, this kind of spell, which tested the ability to control spells, was greatly reduced in power in his hands. So Keys was able to slowly deal with him and try to drag the battle into garbage time. Although the tyrant worm's shocking bite had swallowed a lot of the demon army's vanguard troops, it had indeed pulled the battle into a straight line and opened a gap in the stalemate. A large number of Tana reed demons had successfully broken through this gap, and some of the most vigorous and brave demons had even reached the outer walls of Bottor Fortress. On the other hand, although the otherworldly mercenaries in Bottor Fortress had activated a large number of consumable facilities, including the cloud-burning spell Pseudo, the endless stream of demons, under the encouragement and threat of the Demon Lord's arrival, had broken through these fortress-level defensive traps bit by bit despite the heavy casualties. Since the cannons in Bottor Fortress had been firing at full capacity for more than an hourglass, the enhanced cannonballs that were filled with silver powder had been used up. Only a small number of silver-plated cannonballs and ordinary cannonballs were left to support the defenders. Although the barb demons responsible for firing the cannons were not afraid of the high temperature emitted by the cannons from time to time, the cannons would explode due to the lack of cooling down, causing a lot of chaos. It was only under the strong suppression of the bone demon gendarmes in charge of supervising the battle that there were no more major mistakes. The giant ogre Neru and mechanical golem number 21, who were originally responsible for guarding the gap in the fortress's defenses, had given up on defending this place after more gaps appeared in other places. They had come to the second layer of the defensive wall to receive and organize the retreating defenders to enter in an orderly manner and fill in the new positions in time. Damn it, this guy is getting more and more difficult to deal with. Is it done or not? The tyrant worm gradually lost its patience in front of a prey that had not been taken down for a long time. Hemtar, who was fighting Keys, gradually began to use powerful evocation spells to attack. And according to the young blue dragon's observation, the tyrant worm that was still sticking its head out was also getting restless, as if it wanted to personally take care of him. Chapter 86. As the signal had yet to appear, Keyes was caught in a dilemma. He could only grit his teeth and decide to hold on for a while longer. I hope it'll be quick. If the demon lord really comes down personally, then the best strategy is to run, the young blue dragon thought to himself as he dodged Hemter's offensive spells. Similar to the situation of its commander, the mercenary fortress of Bar, though, was also in a precarious situation under the onslaught of the demon army. The outermost defensive line of the fortress was about to be completely lost. The consumable defensive facilities like cloud-burning pseudo that were originally attached to it had all gone out of action. Those who were lucky enough to survive had already retreated to the back of the second wall to organize the defense. After more than 2 hourglasses of fierce battle, most of the mercenaries from the other planes were close to the limit of their physical strength. They no longer took the initiative to attack and defend against the enemy outside the fortress like before. Those who flinch will be executed. The giant ogre, Neru, waved his weapon and executed a soldier who had been scared out of his wits by the Thanner re-demons. Such executions were taking place in many places within the fortress. This was the most important job of the supervision team, formed by the bone demons and barb demons. At this time, only the Bats of Devil soldiers could still maintain their fighting spirit against the Thanner re-demons due to their nature. The only situation that could be considered favorable was that other than the artillery positions that the barb demons were in charge of, the long-range troops that had not participated in the battle earlier began to show their might. The spellcaster troops began to release a large number of lethal battlefield spells that had been prepared for a long time. The barb demons, equipped with hellish crossbows, and the crossbowmen extracted from the mercenaries from the other planes, also began to rain arrows on the Thanner re-demons. It was funny to say that the Thanner re-demons were like bulls attracted by a handful of fodder. Wave after wave, they poured into the huge slaughterhouse that was Bar, though. But the mercenaries from the other planes were not as relaxed as us who were reading books. They still had the time to daydream. The mercenaries from the other planes, who had gradually stabilized after being suppressed, were now desperately sniping at the enemy in the face of the threat of the destruction of the fortress. Dark clouds pressed down on the city, threatening to destroy it. The raging waves formed by the demons of the bottomless abyss kept slamming into the mercenary fortress from Bar, though. For a time, everyone was in danger, and our main character, Keyes, was also slowly falling into a bitter struggle. Hemtar had completely given up on capturing the young Megalosaurus alive. All kinds of astonishing spells were thrown at the young blue dragon, hovering in the sky, as if they were free. Not good. That fiend overlord is making a move. Keyes, who didn't dare to recklessly face the enemy and could only rely on his mobility to engage in guerrilla warfare, suddenly felt an astonishing spell fluctuation. It was exactly the same feeling he felt before the giant beast broke out of the ground. Before he could react, a huge suction force locked onto the blue dragon's body that was still flying. The tyrant worm's huge mouth that was full of fangs aimed at the young blue dragon and sucked in a deep breath. When it rains, it pours. The fiend overlord's incarnation, Hemtar, took advantage of the moment when Keyes' body was unstable and successfully cast a dimensional anchor on the young blue dragon. Keyes, who couldn't use greater teleportation, flapped his dragon wings with all his might. He knew that if he was pulled to a low altitude by the suction force, he would have to face the fiend overlord directly. If that happened, there would be no chance of survival. Under the stimulation of a life and death crisis, the young blue dragon gathered all the remaining energy in his body at a speed far faster than before. The triple Megalosaurus breath, which contained the golden dragon's dragon flames, weakening gas, and even a powerful electromagnetic field to activate the super railgun, was shot at the tyrant worm's huge mouth with a narrow band of kinetic energy converted from potential energy. The recoil from this unprecedented breath counteracted the huge suction force that was pulling Keyes. The young blue dragon didn't even have time to care about the damage caused by the breath. He rushed in the direction of the mercenary fortress from Bar, though. "You can't run," Hemtar roared loudly. As a high-grade spellcaster, the incarnation of the fiend, Overlord, seemed to want to use this method to sweep away all the grievances that he had suffered before. However, the bold words that he had just said were like a glass cup that fell from the table and was smashed into pieces by a black hand that emerged from a dark corner. Snader, who had been hiding for a long time, controlled the terrifying armor that was used as a temporary body to launch a sneak attack on the dragon subbody. This former legendary lich, who was now a half-lich wizard, was naturally very familiar with the art of attacking from behind because he was born as a drow. Coupled with more than 300 years of diligent study on the dragon's subbody and the maggot attached to it, no one knew better than him how to inflict more damage on this old enemy of his. Species targeted strong immobilization, withering touch, Snader's worm specimen making spell, wax amber seal. These were the sequences of spells that were preset in advance. Once the terrifying armor touched Hemtar, the dragon's subbody that grew on the tip of the tyrant worm's tongue lost part of its vitality due to a large amount of dehydration in an instant. Then, with the help of the sealing spell that blocked the energy transmission from the fiend Overlord, the damage was amplified. To be fair, even if Snader had not degenerated into a half-lich, he was no match for the incarnation of the fiend Overlord in a one-on-one fight. At the very least, this sequence of spells that could cause great damage to the opponent had to be activated through contact, which he could not do by himself. It was just that Keys had successfully attracted the attention of the fiend Overlord, which gave him the opportunity to strike. After the successful strike, the half-lich did not linger. He waved his hand that was slightly corroded by the acidic saliva of the tyrant worm on Hemtar's body, and immediately activated advanced teleportation to leave this troublesome place. Unlike Snade's graceful departure, the tyrant worm felt as if it had accidentally bitten its tongue while speaking. However, the pain was much more intense and drove the tyrant worm into a frenzy. Had it not been for the exhaustion of preparing for the apotheosis and the discomfort of traveling through the soil of Avernus, the tyrant worm would have completely awakened and destroyed everything in front of it. When the time comes, the power of heaven and earth works together. When the time comes, the hero is not free. Just as the behemoth was channeling more power to its dragon subbody to heal its wounds, a sacred radiance burst out from its body in an instant. A fist that carried the power of kindness and vanquishing evil forcefully broke through the tyrant worm's skin that was tougher than steel, and a mortal figure leaped out of the demon lord's body. The continuous pain made the tyrant worm involuntarily stop trying to save its incarnation. It did not even have time to chase after the ant that had hurt it. The power of Chongshan Xie not only opened a channel in its body, but also turned into an extremely stubborn toxin that constantly offset the large amount of energy released by the fiend Overlord to heal itself. As a result, more of the creatures that had been swallowed, but had not been digested, escaped through the escape channel. The one who performed the surgery on the tyrant worm was none other than Jason, who had suddenly broken out of the soil and swallowed it. Inside the Bartholomew mercenary fortress, in the wartime medical camp below the battle command room, an underground passage that was guarded by the elite bone devils sent by Blue the Ogre Gourmet had been opened. Under the organization of the Devils of Bartholomew, the defenders of the fortress who had survived hundreds of battles quickly retreated into the passage. It turned out that Keys had already predicted that the Bartholomew fortress would fall under the siege of the demon army after being airdropped into the acid fog canyon. His original plan was to follow the great leader's guiding principle of if the bottom is lost, everyone will lose. If the bottom is lost, everyone will be lost. If the bottom is lost, everyone will be lost. If the bottom is lost, everyone will be lost. However, with the addition of the Demolic, Snade, he had a more reliable solution. He was secretly plotting against the demon army. The half-golems who were in charge of the security of the goblin noble, Riknaz, were all involved in the excavation work. In addition, the Blue Dragon was an expert in earthwork. Under the guidance of Keyes, an underground passage leading to Snade's laboratory was completed in a few days. At the same time, the construction of the Hellgate Fortress was nearing completion in the Demolika's lair. The cheap bloat demons, that had been airdropped into the fortress as magic materials had all been used up. The Demolik had personally set up a spell concealment array that effectively prevented anyone from investigating the fortress. Even the acid fogworms that were spread all over the plain were unable to do so. As the defenders of the fortress retreated, the demon army gradually resolved the interference set up by the spellcasters. Outside the fortress, the tyrant worm had finally used its filthy abyssal power to destroy the power left behind by the holy samurai. This demon lord, who had been injured both physically and mentally, rammed into the walls of the Bartholomew Fortress with all its remaining strength. A single blow had caused an effect that even Helmuter's meteor blast had not been able to achieve. Most of the outermost walls of the fortress had collapsed, leaving only a few remnants. This demon lord was beyond furious. The dragon's secondary body had been revived with a large amount of magic energy from the main body. Due to the shared memories of the main body, he was now gnashing his teeth in anger at the holy samurai that he had a grudge with. Helmuter, who had risen into the air, looked around, trying his best to find the figure of this ant that had repeatedly brought him heavy injuries. Even if he skinned him, pulled out his tendons, and ground his bones to dust, it would not be enough to dispel the resentment in his heart. When he saw Johnson's figure enter the innermost defensive walls of the Bartholomew Fortress, the demon lord's avatar immediately instigated the tyrant worm to once again launch an unstoppable attack. However, perhaps this demon lord did not look at the almanac before leaving today. When he rushed to the center of the Bartholomew Fortress, the holy samurai had already jumped into the underground cave of the wartime medical camp. Just as Helmuter was about to urge the tyrant worm to burrow into the ground and launch a pursuit, a throwing object pierced through the air and struck the dragon's secondary body. Once bitten, twice shy, Helmuter had suffered a great loss several times in a day because he had underestimated his opponent. This time, it could be said that he was more careful. He did not wait for the throwing object to get close to him. He first cast a spell to firmly control it, then followed up with a disintegrate spell. With his excellent eyesight, he could vaguely see that the throwing object seemed to be in the shape of a pancake. There was something like a needle on one of the pancakes that spun counterclockwise. It was a simple timer. More accurately, it was some sort of timer trigger. The Goblin engineers had helped Parr design the per-potion diffusion equipment and created a large number of these timer triggers. The combination of the two allowed the potions that the witch doctor concocted to take effect at a certain point in time. The reason Keyes had to grit his teeth and wait for the signal that indicated that the per-potion diffusion equipment with this timer had been installed and tested, no matter how hard he fought. In the command room of the Bartholomew Fortress, after confirming that the 3 ogre brothers and the 2 goblin golems had successfully teleported through the portal, the young human blue dragon heard 2 violent collisions. He looked towards the source of a sound and saw the tyrant worm that had broken into the core of the fortress. Without thinking, Quest used the prototype of the timer that he wanted to keep as a collection as a hidden weapon and threw it at the demon lord who was acting violently. Then, he passed through the portal without looking back. The guiding ingredients that Paru had used to concoct this batch of potions came from the remains of Tana Ri that could be collected. The ogre voodoo doctor had divided the extract of the Baelur's demon lymph into several portions to produce better results. In the end, they were all added to the potion pools of over 20 evaporation equipment. Chapter 88. As the old saying goes, though the process is complicated, one must not neglect labor. Though the taste is expensive, one must not neglect material resources. It was the same for potions and poisons. The gift that the ogre witch doctor and the goblin engineer had prepared for the demon army that had invaded Fort Bador was indeed extraordinary. The green fog produced by the purling potion instantly shrouded the entire fort. Except for the tyrant worm, all the Tana reed demons that inhaled even a little of this fog were immediately affected. These guys more or less began the process of passive evolution. The higher-level demons were slightly better. Some of them had some abnormalities after a small part of their body failed to evolve. But the Tana reed demons like the Dretches were miserable. After their passive evolution failed, most of them would die due to the loss of too much life force. In just a dozen breaths, almost half of the demon army had died. The number of casualties was even more than the total number of casualties caused by all the mercenaries from the other planes. The tyrant worm was a demon lord, and naturally was not affected by the passive evolution induced by external factors. However, the sudden change in the army under its command still caused it to expend a large amount of spell energy to add advanced poison protection to its body. As the spellcaster of the demon lord, its dragon subbody was also benefited from this. Helmful was in great confusion for a moment. As the main body of the tyrant worm, it might not pay attention to some common sense. But he was the incarnation of a demon lord created by the best spellcasters in the multiverse. Although he was not very knowledgeable, he still remembered the common sense that most Tana reed demons are immune to poison. Could it be that a poison that could cause mass destruction to the Tana reed demons had been developed? But if there was such a product, why didn't the demons of Batsu use it on the main battlefield like the Grey Field? Why did they leak the information about this weapon in such a small battle? And it seemed that not all the Tana reed demons were negatively affected. Under Helmful's careful observation, he found that a large number of parasitic acid mist worms in the bodies of the Tana reed demons were not affected by the green poisonous fog. Instead, these worms became lively and lively. Some of the worms that had inhaled more of the green fog even devoured their hosts in a flash, completing the evolution of the scourge swarm that would have taken a longer time to achieve. Fortunately, there's still some gains this time. Helmful comforted himself as he watched the new calamity bugs break out of their cocoons one after another. His anxious mood relaxed a little. However, this batch of calamity bugs was generally very weak, and only a few had reached the middle-ranked demon level. Looking at the dispirited demons in the demon army, the dragon subbody was considering whether to let the newborn calamity bugs roam free and use them as nourishment. At this moment, Keys, who had just walked out of a portal in a large underground graveyard in the depths of the fungus forest, received a small metal box from the goblin engineer Ricknaz. This device made of brass had a square shape, and its surface was slightly rough without any treatment. A line of neat, small goblin words was engraved on the back of the device. Spanner Family Company honorary product. The young blue dragon lifted the lid of the small brass box and pressed the button inside without thinking. Why is there no reaction? After listening for a moment, Kith asked the goblin Ricknaz, who was standing beside him calmly, in confusion. The great engineer replied with a smile. Let the waves fly for a while longer. Before he even finished speaking, a massive explosion and violent tremors arrived at almost the same time. Art is an explosion. This was a phrase that originated from a certain bomb maniac. The previous commander of the Bator fortress had also said. However, Keys had elaborated, the ultimate art is the ultimate explosion. Back in Avernus, when they were attacked by the demon vanguard, the barbed demon commander had only detonated the explosive stored in one of the defensive walls to annihilate almost all of the invaders. The young blue dragon was doing the same. However, he had filled every conceivable place in Bator fortress with explosives. With the double concealment of spells and the bone demon army, not a single defender of the fortress knew about it. His behavior could be described as deranged, but the effect could be described as shocking. As for the demons in the massive barrel of gunpowder that was the Bator fortress, who had the time to care about their feelings? The massive explosion had not only flattened all the buildings in the fortress, but had even blown the tyrant worm's body out of the ground. This massive beast of unknown tonnage was thrown into the air before falling heavily to the ground. The Bator fortress had been reduced to a deep crater. The harvest that Helmet Tar had been so excited about, the newborn calamity worms, had been reduced to nothingness in the violent explosion, just like the rest of the Thanner re-demons. Not even a single strand of hair was left behind. If this demon lord had only suffered some minor injuries before, then it could definitely be said to be heavily injured now. The dragon's subbody was now a bloody mess. The giant worm's body was riddled with wounds of various sizes from the shockwaves of the explosion. Its fury was indescribable, but the tyrant worm, which had just recovered from its dizziness, was startled by the violent spell fluctuations coming from afar before it could do anything. At that moment, it had no time to treat its injuries and burrowed into the ground of the acid fog canyon. The Hell Gate that had been prepared for a long time in Lich Snade's magic research laboratory finally took shape. Thanks to sufficient preparation time and construction materials, the stone portico that was soaked in the flesh of the lowlifes was built to be extremely grand. The Hell Gate was more than 100 feet tall and was tightly attached to the top of the tomb. The giant door, which was enshrouded in a light blue magical radiance, was large enough to allow a dozen giants to pass through side by side. After the successful communication with the Avernus plane, a light blue mirror-like magical passage formed in the middle of the Hell Gate. A dragon head that looked like a giant skull poked out of the passage. It was an elderly black dragon. Being cautious by nature, it first cast a variety of magical defenses on itself, then continued to use its eyes that were enchanted with true sight to observe the people standing around it. Only then did it slowly move the rest of its body out of the Hell Gate. Suddenly, as if it was pushed by a huge force, the elderly black dragon stumbled and fell out of the portal's range. Dilly-dallying fellow, the young blue dragon who was standing not far away in his human form understood the dragon's reprimand. He saw a red dragon that was much larger than the previous black dragon striding out of the Hell Gate with its head held high. The other dragon that had been scolded by it earlier did not want to, dare not, argue with the red dragon. In a fit of anger, it flapped its wings and soared into the sky, breaking through the top of the tomb and rushing into the sky of the acid fog canyon. The elderly red dragon recognized Keys's identity as a megalosaurus and said uneasily, "The coward has suddenly become a brainless idiot. Don't you think so, little one?" However, he did not wait for the young blue dragon's reply. Like the other dragon that had been scolded as an idiot, he also flew out of the top of the tomb. 1, 2, 3. All kinds of colorful megalosaurus walked out of the Hell Gate one after another. Driven by the Dragon Queen's will of conquest, they began the prelude of the plane conquest. Mechanical Golem number 21 used his finger to poke the terrifying armor standing beside him and said to the half-lich Snade who was hiding in it, "There's a big hole in the roof of your house. Shut up. Repair the roof, professional waterproof, for 30 years. What's the price? It's free. Just a recommendation vote. Subscription." Chapter 89. As far as I know, there have been many examples of powerful mages summoning Megalosaurus to fight for them. Many of them are legendary champions like Kelvin Blackstaff, whose name has shaken the multiverse. According to the records of the Goblin Empire, these mages generally use a spell known as Dragon Oath. Some of the more outstanding ones can use Greater Dragon Oath. The number of Megalosaurus that respond to a summoning is often limited by the difficulty of the mission and the rewards offered by the caster. At most, it is difficult for the number to exceed single digits. But even so, these top-level curse-type spells were all crowned with the name of nation-destroying magic. Then, what is the name of the dragons that I saw in the acid fog canyon plain, covering the sky and covering the sun? Report of the Bloody Battle of Reichenaz, Arbis Volume 25. Following the operation of Hellgate Fortress, more than 200 Megalosaurus of the Penishade arrived in the acid fog canyon of the bottomless abyss. 3/4 of them were the backbone of the species in their prime, while the rest were older and more powerful dragons and a few extremely old ones. A pair of fraternal twin ancient red dragon brothers were the current leaders of the dragons. They each led half of the Megalosaurus to other places to reinforce the Bator expeditionary force that had yet to open Hellgate Fortress. Apart from that, there were also a large number of abyssal dragon demons and other bats of devils that followed closely behind the dragons. They had successfully arrived through the portal. Ever since Keyes had finished communicating with Avernus in Hellgate Fortress, the other side had completely taken over the task of supplying magic. Hellgate Fortress was like a water pipe that had been turned on. The military forces of the 9 prisons of Bator were continuously channeled to the acid fog canyon. The well-trained legion of devils immediately took over the defense of Hellgate Fortress. Large numbers of lowly demons were dismembered by these cruel and efficient executioners, turning into flesh and blood sacrifices to fight against the chaotic laws of the bottomless abyss. The demons and imps summoned by the Batsu summon ability were all whipped by the senior-ranked demons to build new defensive fortresses from scratch. As the first commander of the expeditionary force to open Hell's Gate Fortress, and with his identity as a megalosaurus, the evil Dragon Council, and that strangely long and difficult-to-remember name of the devil bureaucracy immediately issued a notice of commendation to Keyes. In fact, the young blue dragon had even obtained the special privilege of retreating from the bloody battlefield in advance and returning to his original world to recuperate through the Bateau wartime recuperation regulations and the elite Pinochet dragon seedling cultivation plan. He's really better at writing than some web novel authors. Keyes couldn't help but secretly complain as he held the letter of commendation that was nearly 10,000 words long. However, he still had a grateful expression on his face as he spoke respectfully to the emissaries in front of him. "Thank you for gracing me with your presence, sirs. Please forgive me if I'm lacking in hospitality." Unlike the rewards given after killing the Baylor, there were 2 emissaries this time. They represented the evil Dragon Council and the Strategic Attack and Logistics Bureau of Bateau's first layer of territory. One of them was someone Keyes was familiar with, the Chinibu Red Dragon Cryphia. The other was a pit fiend that represented the strongest fighting force of the Batsu race. Unlike the great devil who had been pretending to be cold and silent, this third-generation god was surprised to see Keyes again so soon. She circled around Keyes 3 times in his human form before speaking. "You're quite capable, dragon. You actually managed to survive the attack of the tyrant worm. Although the strength of those dactyls isn't worth mentioning, there's still a demon lord. I was just lucky. It's all thanks to your care and the guidance of the great will of the Dragon Queen." Modesty was the traditional virtue of the Chinese. Besides, what if he said something wrong and the Red Dragon insisted on having a competition? What should he do? Keyes did not have the habit of, "I'd rather die if I didn't cause trouble." Right now, he only wanted to quietly receive the rewards that he deserved and then bring his friends back from this bloody battlefield to his familiar dragon nest to develop wretchedly. He felt more and more that ever since he got involved in the Blood War, he had been getting closer to a certain death student. Wherever he went, things would happen. The old dragon Sirota had found someone to help him get into a safe and remote camp, but he'd met 2 Baylors in Avernus. It hadn't been easy for them to gang up and kill the 2 Baylors, but the higher-ups had arranged for them to be airdropped. Just now, he'd relied on spending money in the acid fog canyon to get rid of 2 batches of airdrops, which had directly provoked a demon lord. If he didn't retreat quickly, what kind of enemy would appear in front of him next? A demon prince or an evil god of the abyss? No matter what it was an existence Keyes couldn't afford to offend. Even if his strength and size far exceeded his peers, he was still a child. Former commander of the expeditionary forces, the first layer of Bator. Strategy, logistics. Anyway, it's the authorities. In order to commend your achievements, I've decided to reward you with a silver-bladed weapon bestowed upon you by the current queen of Githyanki. The pit fiend, who had always been cold and callous, had the heavy responsibility of being the temporary commander of Batsu's army. When he saw that Cryphia was about to say something, he took the initiative to speak first. He then took out a small sword case made of bronze from his spatial equipment, passing it to Keyes before continuing. All you have to do is imprint your secret imprint on the formation of this sword case, and it'll open safely. After finishing his explanation, the pit fiend didn't wait for the young blue dragon to express his gratitude before using a high-grade teleportation spell to leave. The Githyanki were a type of Githyanki. They were different from their close relatives, the Githzalai. Almost all Githyanki were fighters through and through. After overthrowing the spirit-sucking empire together, the two went their separate ways and developed a culture of mutual contempt. In the great revenge of overthrowing the spirit-sucking empire, the Githyanki queen paid an unknown price to reach an agreement with the evil dragon goddess Tiamat. The dragon queen sent one of her vassals and consorts, the red dragon of Philemon, to the astral plane to assist in the war. Since then, the Githyanki had formed an alliance with the red dragon and had a tradition of plundering the astral plane together. As for the silver-bladed weapon, it was a special weapon the Githyanki had created to fight against their spirit-sucking masters. This weapon could guide the user's will and origin force, causing both physical and mental damage. Only the Githyanki who had gone through the necessary special training had the ability to maintain the sharpness of the silver-bladed weapon with their will. Only then would they be crowned as Githyanki knights. In the eyes of every Githyanki, every silver-bladed weapon was a symbol of their race's glory, a priceless work of art. The Githyanki knights would drive starships or magic ships to capture and destroy any non-Githyanki who dared to carry or use a silver-bladed weapon, unless the silver-bladed weapon was given as a gift by the previous Githyanki empress or the current undead Queen Varakis. Don't worry, I have a silver-bladed weapon like this too. My father gave me one when I was young, and it's the same as yours. It was given by the previous Githyanki empress herself. Although there aren't many of them, there are still plenty of silver-bladed weapons in Bador. The red dragon Kryphia kindly reminded when she saw Keys holding the silver-bladed sword box like he had never seen the world. He didn't know whether to open it or not. Note 1. Githyanki means followers of Githyanki in its own language. Under the guidance of Githyanki, the Githyanki not only overthrew the tyranny of spirit-sucking masters and concluded an alliance with the red dragon race, but they also established a militarized social form and introduced the caste system. After the death of Githyanki, her undead advisor, Vlakith, replaced her position. In order to distinguish her from the title Githyanki Empress, she will be called the Undead Queen, Lich Queen. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.